Everyone, and welcome to the Pancake Parlay, episode 94. I'm your host, The Don, and I'm here with Chatters. How are you today?
I'm good, Don. How are you?
I'm good. We are the Pancake Parlay. We're your hosts for tonight, where there's a pop culture podcast that we talk about movies, TV shows, games, comic books, anime, basically the whole lot. So yeah, we're just gonna jump in straight into some news of our favorite, I guess, hedgehog, because I don't know, and no other characters a hedgehog, but essentially Sonic the Hedgehog movie has basically made $200 million. Domestic, is it domestic or is it international?
No, I think it's a global box office take is at the moment. At the time of this when this article came out, which was on the 25th, which means I'm assuming it's made a lot more now, but it made 200 million. And I think it's globally, and I think it's basically on its way to being, if not, has been the biggest video game box office film, which is cool because I really like the film, and I know that you recently watched the film, correct?
Yes, I have. So I watched it, and pretty much like you said in your review, you're just like it's a good fun time. And I completely agree. I actually really like this film. I actually laughed a few times, like out loud, because it was actually quite funny at times. I think pretty much the thing that obviously really elevates it is Jim Carrey and his performance as Eggman.
Hmm.
I honestly feel like he like the movie's good in it of itself, but man, like his performance is just so goddamn good.
Hmm.
As like a kind of crazy maniac guy who thinks he's better than everyone else. He's kind of like a Lex Luthor, but a little bit more goofier Lex Luthor.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's probably a good way to. And he basically gets bold towards the end, so I think the analogy is apt. Also, just like an additional update, I think like the total box office is estimated to be about 271 million. So that's worldwide.
no,
So that's pretty cool.
that's pretty good for a movie that like had its ups and downs. I would say as in like in its production, like especially obviously for that first reveal and how Sonic looked like. I'd
Hmm.
say they've done a pretty good job of bringing back fans. Even that I don't know if you know the meme, but that kid who's screaming about Sonic, you
Yeah,
freaking
yeah,
freaks,
yeah.
that guy. He actually came back, and made a recent video about him reviewing the Sonic the movie. And he's
Oh,
like a
did he?
teenager and
That's cool.
everything, and I'm like, oh my god, he's back. So like,
Well, I
yeah,
I know he came back. I know the guy came back for like another video, and like it was like kind of like quite a somber video because he's like, oh, like I've grown up a lot since like when I first made that first film. So he's like completely different. But it is funny to see that he's still kind of continuing the meme. And also the thing about this movie is it kind of finally kind of paints Sonic in a pretty positive picture in like the eyes of general movie goers and just like kind of fan culture, because I kind of feel like Sonic gets a pretty bad rap because like some of the video games are pretty like awful. Um,
or you can say all
if
of them are awful, like me.
well, I think well, yeah, well, I mean, for example, like Sonic Mania that came out, that was like a fan, well, not a fan mod, but rather it was created. Sega hired people who were Sonic modders to make the game, and it subsequently became a really popular game and sold like a lot. So it kind of shows that yeah, like those kind of old style 2D sprite games like have their fan bases, and if you make a good version of it, it will sell rather than these like kind of I don't know, half-assed like video. I forget what there was one where like you could make your own character, and I don't know. That's
Well,
probably
that's the thing,
like
isn't
a
it? Oh yeah, that's not Sonic Adventure or whatever it is, but
no, no, not Sonic Adventure. I forget what
was it
it's called.
Sonic
It's one that came out.
Colors or something? I don't know. There was
Yeah,
one of
yeah, something
those.
like that. Yeah, you see, I can't even remember. Sonic's been a werewolf. Sonic been, I
There's
don't know,
Shadow with a gun.
Shadow. Yeah,
It's like
Shadow with the
yeah,
gun.
there's just so much extra Sonic stuff that like I don't like care about. But like yeah, but that's that. And going back to the movie, like I'm really happy that it's doing well. Funny. It's pretty quite funny, and I think it does a really good stuff of kind of establishing, I guess maybe Sonic lore. About the rings. It had really good use for the rings, being kind of like a
Hmm.
transportation device. Um, you know, like you know, I think it's pretty fun the situations that they're in as well. And yeah, CGI is pretty good, and yeah, they pretty much sequel kind of bait it right at the end if you stayed, showing like a character, and then you're just like, okay, cool. Sonic's probably gonna come back, and It's owned by
Yeah, yeah.
Paramount. So yeah, I think there's a new franchise on our hands.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think a lot of this movie does have sequel potential, but it was more riding on whether this first one was successful or not. And I think more or less it is successful, because I think it is going to be eventually once, the final takes for it, finish, like it will make like at least three times its original budget, which, as we mentioned before, is the kind of cutoff between whether a movie is successful or not. And yeah, Sonic does an excellent job. I think, yeah, like you said, Jim Carrey does an excellent job. Like, and apparently, like a lot of the stuff that he said was very off the cuff and not in the script. So it's kind of hilarious, like how some of the actors and stuff had to have a straight face. There's like an interaction between the police officer. I forget his name, but like Marston's character, he's not letting Eggman come into the house, and he's saying, "Oh well, I've was making things like back when you were drinking baby formula." It's, "Oh, I
Well,
was
I
making
was
baby
making formulas
formula
while you were
when you
drinking
were
baby
drinking
formula.
baby formula." It's like, and then the comment is, "I was breastfed," and he's like, "Nice." Like
Yeah, it's just like
everybody,
random small things like that, or even like there's one bit, and it's like this is my funniest joke. When he's like dancing, and his assistant comes up, he's like, "I thought you might like a latte." It's like, "Of course I want a latte. I like the way you make it,"
yeah,
but it's like in a very like like a screaming tone.
yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
like
yeah.
that for some reason that just got to me. I'm like, yeah, I like out of all the like more recent comedians, like like your Ben Stillers or all your Seth Rogen's and all like that. I feel like Jim Carrey is pretty much up the top. Like I actually think he has a really good ability to make people laugh.
I think the thing is, like, Jim Carrey has, I think, when I looked it up, when I saw it, he hasn't been in a movie that's been like net profitable since Bruce Almighty, I believe. And
And that was
I think,
2003.
yeah, like ages ago. And I think ultimately that kind of shows that, it's not necessarily, Carrey's like kind of fault in regards to like the fact that he kind of gets typecasted into like certain roles. Because yeah, like he's always usually that zany character, or like, he's kind of a bit odd in a kind of a fish out of water story, right? Like, these are the characters he usually plays, or that general eccentric character. But when you put him in a role and give him a good script, that's when he kind of shines. And I think that's what he did with this movie. And maybe because he was able to kind of play with the script a little bit more, that allowed him to kind of be more himself. Because I think we don't usually get a comedic Dr. Robotnik. We usually get like a more like a bumbling idiot, um, Dr. Robotnik, right? So we kind of get like a more competent version of him, because he actually seemed like a threat to Sonic throughout this movie.
Yeah, and the
Especially,
use of like new technology with the drones, because that's essentially what
mm,
Robotnik did. He has all these robots,
yeah,
kidnapping like animals and things like that. And it's like it's really good to have that kind of like a modern wise. There's all these like drones and things like that. And I feel like yeah,
hmm
that's really cool that they established that kind of in the movie as well. And it's like yeah, I just thoroughly enjoyed it, and I wasn't bored or anything. Especially like since this movie really is just aimed more or less at kids.
yeah,
But yeah, I
like,
really
yeah,
enjoyed
this
it.
isn't. Yeah, like, again, I think the problem is like there were a lot of people who were coming out, like maybe critics and stuff, who were saying, like, even on like, things that I was watching online and just reviews, and people were expecting this movie to kind of be like, I don't know, Citizen Kane of like video game movies almost, right? We were like, oh well, it's aimed at kids, and the jokes, some of them don't like land and so. And it's like, yeah, it's not supposed to be like the most perfect film ever, but like to say that it's a bad film, I think is like doing a really disservice to, I guess, like the creation of this film, especially. And the thing is, I don't know if you agree, but I think this movie would have been significantly worse if they still had that Nightmare Sonic in the movie.
Yeah, because I don't know.
Um,
I think it would have taken people out of the movie 100%, and people were
yeah,
just like, Sonic wouldn't be as charming, and just be like, nah, man, I just I don't feel this. It just be something. It just something's off, and it was off. That's why the team doing all the special effects did it, which now they're bankrupt, which is really a kind of a shame of what
hmm
happened. This whole story behind the scenes of I guess Sonic.
Yeah, like I said it during my Sonic review that yeah, like there isn't a lot of kind of this safety net that is there for people who are animation and creators, even though CGI kind of make the movie most of the time. Like I don't know if you've ever seen the behind the scenes of like the Flash or Supergirl. There was really good
Oh yeah,
video.
so people snip it out and put on Facebook, and they just they do their powers, but since there's no like music or like special effects to cover up with their movement, it just looks so stupid.
Yeah, yeah, like there's this one where they did a crossover between the Flash and Supergirl, and they're fighting like the enemies, and it just has the Flash kind of waving his hands in the air, but there's no wind, and then it just has Kara kind of blowing, but there's no like frost breath, and then she flies away, but then it just looks really pathetic when she actually does the act. But it's like obviously it's not supposed to like she can't fly, so how is she realistically supposed to show that she's
Yeah,
flying, right?
it actually reminds me
Um,
of also that other the special effects like about behind the scenes one of I think it's Winter Soldier, where it's
hmm.
just got like it's got like Cap and everyone like that, and even like Doctor Strange and all that type of stuff where they jump and they just
Mm,
jump off a box. And
yeah.
it's like in the movie, it makes them look like they're jumping like really large things. And they just like have these little small jumps.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder if it's because like if you kind of jump off a small box, it rather than off like an actual great height, it seems like you're more confident jumping off, if you know what I mean. Like if you actually get him like with like a pulley system and like with a harness from an actual height, maybe they do that if they want to get like a genuine expression from you of like, oh, this is a really long drop. I wonder if it's like because they're superheroes and oh well, jumping off a building isn't a big deal. So like the genuine reaction to jumping off like a building for a superhero would be no different to off a box, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like the thing is like CGI and all these like what I was mentioning with the Flash and Supergirl stuff, like the CGI just makes the scene look significantly better, and it's the same thing with like Avengers. But you don't see these animation studios getting these like awards front and center, or if they do, it's usually during like the ad breaks of these Oscar nomination shows, right? So yeah, I think ultimately there is obviously a culture behind not caring about these things because even I'll admit like when it comes to the credits I don't stick around and look at who the CGI team is, right? But maybe there should be a bigger emphasis on this was made by like this animation studio, and then this animation studio should get some prominence, and there should be some I don't know what the solution is, like
But
I'm just a
yeah, definitely there needs to be more because or more effort, especially behind the scenes stuff. You don't really see special features anymore, which is kind of a shame because I'm a big sucker for behind the scenes type of stuff and how things are made. Um,
mm.
but yeah,
Oh.
things like no, like for example, like the biggest franchise right now, obviously, is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like
Mm.
yeah, pretty much 90% of like Infinity War and Endgame is on like basically a green screen. So then you've had like literally a whole team of animators literally actually making the film itself.
Hmm.
So props to anyone doing special effects and kind of like CGI work because definitely that is what the movement's gone towards now, and it's like that's the way it goes. That's why you see something kind of like a John Wick, and it's like it is practical effects, and you can still tell, but the special effects team, it must take a long amount of hours and time, and you know computers with high RAM to deal with all this stuff.
Yeah, and look, even within like the video game industry, there's issues with things like crunch and like trying to get things out early or as soon as possible or before a deadline. And I'm sure that happened for the production of a lot of major films that use CGI. I'm sure it happened for Avengers in some capacity. I know it probably definitely happened for the latest Star Wars film because that movie only kind of wrapped like a month or so before it was released. So there was still stuff happening in the cutting room floor, and oh, we want this card, and then we want this in it, and this and that. So uh, there's all these problems, and I think like ultimately, when it comes to CGI. Especially for something like Sonic, like they do such a good job. But did you hear about how there's like a conspiracy theory regarding like the CGI in Sonic?
Is this the one where I think I know what it is? essentially it was a big ploy all along to say we're going to release this really ugly version, Nightmare Fuel version of Sonic, to the world. Everyone's going to be angry about it. You know, how could you do this? But basically, the plan all along was, hey, we already like this was just for the trailer, or in a way, and then we've kind of basically the original Sonic design or the design that we want is actually
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
movie
yeah.
all
Like
along.
yeah, it was like essentially like the disgusting nightmare design for Sonic was a like a red herring to get the people online to lose their shit. Oh, it looks bad, and just get some social media buzz, and then they do like a bait and switch and say, oh well, no, actually, we're gonna put all this time and effort, and oh maybe it was just like a subtle way to try and delay the film. But I think and the reason why this has kind of come back in the news was because there was this I guess this behind the scene video, and the thing is, they have this Sonic kind of replica on the chair, and the design looks more like the new Sonic rather than the weird nightmare Sonic. It's like this, almost like a clay doll which is sitting in like one of the cars, right? Um, and a lot of people are like, oh well, hey, look, this was you know there behind the scenes, that means it must have been fake. And oh, like as in the whole thing is like the CGI and all that kind of marketing. It was a marketing ploy. To which I can kind of see that that might be the thing, but like when you kind of look at the fact that um, there's a lot of uh, what was it like all the toys that came out, right?
Mm-hmm.
For Sonic kind of kept in line with the design of the Nightmare Sonic design, right? If you look
Yeah,
at all the
and I think
merchandise,
I think there was talks as well of, for example, like what happened with what is it, the Mandalorian and Baby Yoda, where it's like there's like no Baby Yoda merchandise on the stores, and basically
and they're all
the
coming out
only
this year.
merchandise is coming out like months later, and they didn't
Mm,
capitalize on Baby Yoda. So it's like they didn't
mm,
know. So it's like it can, you basically to get toys in production, to get like a 3D model version, prototypes and everything. You know that takes months of planning.
yeah,
And it's like one of those things where it's like kind of knowing that whole type of thing. Who
yeah.
knows? Honestly, it's like oh, but it just could be the internet. You know, they all
Well,
love their
yeah.
rumors.
Well, as one kind of user pointed out, like there is like an old concept design of Sonic that kind of looks like kind of like an in between the Nightmare version and the kind of final design. So it was like a prototype version of it. So it kind of looks more like that, which I definitely agree with. If you look at the fact that they did in the end go with the Nightmare design Sonic, and they then made toys about it, they were so confident that they made toys about it. That stuff costs like hundreds of thousands, if not millions, to kind of design, create, and then distribute those toys. So I don't think that the CGI was some kind of marketing plot. It definitely was expensive, and I guess it kind of worked, but I don't think I wouldn't recommend anybody necessarily doing it going forward. But yeah, that's Sonic in terms of news. Hopefully, it continues to make more money.
Good
But yeah,
success, that's for sure.
exactly. So speaking of more video game news, uh, The Witcher 2. Oh, sorry, The Witcher. Sorry, the TV series. Um, finally started its development in February. So uh, it's entered production in the UK, which is really cool. Um, and I guess that means like we're gonna be able to get more hands on Witcher, maybe like by the end of this year. I guess is that when Witcher came out? End of this year?
It came out like basically like December, so it was pretty much the end of this year. So if it's pretty much semi, it's kind of getting filmed already. You
Mm,
know, and they have to do the CGI, which might take some time. That's
that's
my only
true.
worry. Back to the CGI problem, but if they get that done, then yeah, they're fast tracking it because basically, which is a big hit, especially for Netflix. I think this is pretty much like yeah, like Stranger Things is maybe on its semi way down in the hype, maybe possibly, or like it's up there still, but like Witcher already in its second season is kind of already nearly getting that as much hype as it is because it already has a installed fan base, and I feel like a lot of general people who've never watched played the game are now watching the TV show and now getting more into this world, I guess.
Yeah, I think it also helps that you know something like Game of Thrones left a particular niche open for people to want to consume this kind of medieval content, medieval magic, like sex and violence, right? Like this is the kind of scratched that Game of Thrones itch, but now that it's gone and obviously left a lot of people disappointed, The Witcher has kind of come in and kind of taken over the power vacuum that's been left over. Even though I don't think season one's like that good, like I, I mean, I think obviously you can go back to our Game of Thrones review from it. It's not awful, but it's definitely has a lot of problems, and I think that's obviously like a story writing um aspect of it. But I think the reason why it's also popular is, like you said, it's got an installed fan base. But I feel like a lot of its installed fan base come from obviously the video games, which is based around and primarily Witcher 2 and then subsequently Witcher 3. And so these two games are way, way, way forward into the future in terms of Geralt and what he's doing. And it doesn't necessarily explore everything in the past, which is what the Witcher Netflix series offers. It's kind of like, hey, here's a prequel to these video games almost. And then it gives anybody who is unfamiliar the opportunity to kind of come into this world and kind of enjoy it alongside of all the other like wacky stuff. It's got that, I forget his name. He's Tormund I think Tormund in Game of Thrones. He's like the ginger beard guy.
He's the
He's
guy
in
in
it.
the what is it? The Night's Watch.
No, oh yeah, yeah. I guess he does end up working for the Night Watch. He was originally one of the wildlings, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So like yeah, he's in it. So that's really cool. So yeah, I'm looking forward to more Witcher stuff going forward. Another piece of video game news was Bethesda. They were quote unquote surprised how few people wanted to take part in PvP in Fallout 76.
Is
Yeah,
that a
that
big surprise there? Because like
this
basically
is according to this.
because that's
This
like
is
the whole conceit of Fallout 76 was there was just going to be people there and they could ruin your stuff. But I played the game quite extensively, and it's essentially like you can start fighting people, and it's more like a less like if you attack someone you get a bounty, or like in these certain areas you can fight. But I think it's just one of those innate things where like you can work together, that's fine. Most people do. But there are chances where, it should be more like a hardcore, like, if you're out in the wilderness, someone should be able to kill you and take full damage, which what they did have before is more like you hit someone, you take a little bit of damage, and then it's kind of like after a few hits, then they're just like, okay, they officially want to try to kill you. And I feel like I think essentially this is what the testing ground for I forgot what they call it. It's like the winter Fallout, and that mode is the 100% PvP version of the game. So
Mhm.
yeah, I guess Bethesda's finally
Well,
found a niche for Fallout 76.
well, for what like the 10 people who are still playing it. Well, this is the full quote from Pete Hines. He said, "Well, I mean, at the end of the day, our intention was always we were going to get this out there, see what folks think, and then cater the stuff that we do later to their reaction. So, for example, I think we were a little surprised how few people wanted to take part in PvP and how many more were interested in PvE together." And I think that actually goes back to what you were saying. Like, yeah, people like this whole concept of Fallout 76. They kind of sold it on the idea of, hey, like you can fuck with people and you can get nuke parts and blow up people's bases and stuff. But then it turns out people don't want to like. I remember seeing that and just thinking it was so unappealing. Like, why would you spend hours of your time creating like a base of operations only to have it like easily destroyed, which is what essentially happened when people inevitably hack the game, and being able to destroy people's houses and grief. I don't have a problem with griefing, right? Like, especially if it's like, if you play like something like Minecraft, for example, like, it's very easy to grief someone in a game like that because you set fire to something, it causes like a cascading reaction, but at least you can kind of rebuild things pretty easily in Minecraft. And something like Fallout, where it's like a resource dependent game. There's a lot of microtransactions around acquiring resource, or not necessary, but like in order to facilitate people getting easier access to it. There is this aspect of, well, you could spend a lot of money in this game and then have it destroyed altogether. So it didn't seem appealing, and it's not. And yeah, like you were saying, to me, it's not a surprise. I don't think to a lot of people it's that much of a surprise. I think to them it was because they're like, oh well, we thought people wanted to play this game and wanted more modes. It's like, no, they just wanted a good game. And unfortunately, I think just because of the bad taste they left in people's mouths, people don't want to do the PvP thing. They'd much prefer like everybody just like player versus environment, and we'll all work together to fight the AI, like kind of like like a Destiny versus like a raid boss or something like
Yeah,
that.
and that's pretty much the end game, because essentially what happens is, because I think the thing is like, hey, you can launch a nuke somewhere and your house could get blown up, which you can still do in the game, but like most people when they get all those nuke codes and everything like that, because that's kind of the end game raid. Because there's a few raids, they radiate an area, and then the monsters change, and you basically get red gear and you level up a lot quicker. So most of the times when you launch a nuke, pretty much everyone launched a nuke in a specific area in the map, because that's obviously where the big raid boss is, for the rest of the game. Most people actually work together just to do it because everyone gets the same shared experience and everyone loots and then kind of leaves. But yeah, it's like there's not much, you can't screw around with people, because me and my friend, we did that because I think one of the main problems that people really didn't like is that obviously, like any other Bethesda game, you can't hoard like 1,000 items in your bank
Mm-hmm.
since it's all server side.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, what would happen is like my friend is like, "Hey, I have like 20 mini nukes that I'm never gonna use." So all we did was walk around, find people's bases, and blow them up. And then try to hear their old chat, and we kind of trolled people, and we filmed it, and some people would just like stop attacking us, and we just like blew their stuff up, and sometimes they get angry, and yeah, we were kind of assholes that way, but yeah,
Look, like I said, there is an appeal to kind of do that in the game, but I feel like it's always the case of like, yeah, obviously like you and your friends like obviously like smash it out, and you guys are like this I guess like maybe I wouldn't say top players, but like
But
in
yeah,
that
we were
region,
high
like
tier.
high
Like
level players.
we all had power armor. We pretty much maxed out every single perk that we wanted to in the
Mm,
game, and it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, okay, we're kind of bored. Initially, when people used to start killing you, just like, oh, that sucks. But like, at least there were certain things to block kind of people in a way, or like when you repaired something, it was like lesser value to repair than it is than the initial build. But still,
right.
there were parts where it's like, yeah, we have to go to this one particular area because it has all this plastic. So you gather all the plastic, you put in the your storage box, and since you're in that server, you sign out of that server, then you sign into a different server, and hope that all the things that you just took are still there in the next server. So there was a lot of server hopping to get to place to place to place to get all the kind of resources that you want. But at some point,
Oh,
you do hit
gosh.
that threshold where it's like, okay, well, like we've got everything, we're kind of bored, and that's where it kind of ended up with me and all my friends with Fallout. Is like we kind of did everything that we needed to do in the game, I guess. So we're just
There
kind of
was
like, yeah, whatever.
so there wasn't really like a lot of post game content, which I guess is like what they're promising, especially with I guess the like what's happening with that. Didn't they say there was like going to be like this new expansion coming out with like human NPCs? They're trying to put that like it's like a feature, right?
Yeah, we're pretty much like, yeah, that whole thing, and then essentially that winter mode I think we're talking about is like the basically a version of battle royale as well, where it'll
Yeah,
be like, hey,
got
you
it.
just spawn in the world and you're gonna pick up stuff, but you can also build like turrets and stuff as a battle
Ooh,
royale type of game.
get to the center of the map, otherwise you'll die from the
Yeah, pretty
nuclear
much.
winter.
So yeah, I don't know.
Interesting.
As I mentioned before, Fallout 76 is designed to be one of those games that's going to be played like for 5-10 years, like a game as a service, and it's going to be one of those things where the hardcore Bethesda people are going to keep on playing it, so they get an extra revenue stream, and people active in the franchise, while they make
Yeah,
something like
but
an Elder
I
Scrolls
don't,
stuff and all the other games. Essentially, that's the whole stopgap, because Bethesda was literally just being like, Fallout, 4 years, Elder Scrolls game, 4 years. So that gap of 4 years is like no money coming in. So I think
mm.
this is basic. The whole design of this game was purely based on like, this is like a side thing to get extra money from, basically.
Yeah, but ultimately it failed. I think. I think it's like kind of blown a lot of goodwill. I think obviously they made money because they uh, I don't know. Like, I think a lot of people were disappointed with the game, and it's also left a lot of bad taste in people's mouths, especially given that like what it's like Bethesda, Blizzard, EA, they're all fighting to be like the worst, like and least like consumer friendly video game company at this stage, right? With what they're doing. I think the only thing that like I'm kind of looking forward to coming out of Bethesda oh, actually, I haven't played the original Doom. I think technically I would be interested in Doom Eternal, but the main thing for me would probably be the new Elder Scrolls game once that comes out, because that's going to be hopefully really good. But maybe with because essentially apparently they were using the same engine that they've been for Fallout 76, so maybe they might Fallout 76 and Fallout 4, I think technically same engine. So yeah, like maybe they're like thinking, oh, we might have to go back to the drawing board, especially given that like the engine's so like old and clunky.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but speaking of good games that are going to be coming out, obviously we talked about how Cyberpunk 2077 got delayed, but the guys, who are creating the game, they made an announcement and they basically said that, like on their tweet regarding it, they said gamers should never be forced to purchase the same game twice or pay for upgrades. Owners of Cyberpunk 2077 for the Xbox One will receive the Xbox Series X upgrade for free when available, which I think is awesome because it's very, very pro-consumer. Um, Again, like it allows people to play like there's always that kind of weird thing. I remember I had it when I still played like a lot of console games. When you moved from one console to another, you kind of have to start off with
like
nothing
it's
initially.
fresh. It's fresh where it's like
Yeah,
you had a game, you had to buy new games, and there was none of that backwards
yeah,
compat. Or on top of that, like older games that you bought does not work on the new system in a sense of like there's not a
hmm
new version of it.
yeah,
And this base and essentially with Cyberpunk, and basically it's an initiative by Microsoft, and that's what they're doing.
hmm
And then basically like CD Projekt Red just jumped on it like straight away, like basically the same day as Microsoft announced. They'd be like, "Yep, we're gonna do it," and it's basically just closing that gap of actual generations and having that split. And I feel like this is the generation. This is what Microsoft wanted back with the Xbox One, but we weren't there yet. Where
Well,
it's like,
well, I mean, I wouldn't say that we were there yet. It's just their infrastructure was awful for
yeah,
it. I
infrastructure
think, I
wasn't
think,
there, but yeah, essentially we can kind of see the roots of this, where it's like especially this generation, we've seen a lot of like Game of the Year editions or like the next gen version, like I don't know GTA 5, all
mm,
the Batman Arkham games, the Devil May Cry. Every game had like a next gen port of them, and this basically completely eliminates the version of all that and of rebuying the game. Now maybe at some point down the road, like, and it's all because that's the thing. With Microsoft in their architecture, even if they don't have, a third party, for example, doesn't release a patch to say, oh yeah, you can play the original Assassin's Creed, but with the hardware, it untaps this kind of potential for some of the games that was hidden just to work on the consoles to work. So like, it automatically makes older games look better. They already have that technology in there, so they already have that, but maybe down the road they'll maybe charge for like a patch, but basically it's purely based on the people who developed the games, and Microsoft's just kind of been there being like, since we're the lowest part of this generation, we have to say we are for the gamers. This is the best goodwill that we have, where it's like you don't have to buy next gen ports. And then basically it's all purely based on something like Sony doing it as well. Nintendo's always kind of very doing its own thing, so I don't think it'll happen that way. But
no, I
but
think,
yeah, but basically running back to like, it's basically the onus now is on Sony as well as basically the developers. Like for example, you're talking about EA, like at some point, like if I wanted to play, I don't know, the new Star Wars, the Jedi Fallen Order, for the next gen consoles, I want to play that old game, and there's like a patch where it automatically upgraded to the next gen, with better graphics. And if they
mhm.
don't do that, and people like fans are begging for it, and they don't do it, it makes them feel bad. So basically, forces every single developer's hands to do it, or else they look like complete assholes.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, there is obviously like an investment. Like, like Xbox in particular, they're doing. backwards compatibility, right? And they're kind of like, hey, like all our stuff is going to be compatible going forward. And I guess what the cyberpunk stuff is saying, like, with the game is like, hey, yeah, like, we're partnering up with Xbox. I don't know, yeah, that we're partnering up with
Well, I
Xbox,
think
and
they're semi because they were at the E3 stage and everything like that. So possibly
yeah,
there's a little bit more stuff going on because I think it's
well,
purely
here's
and also it's purely because like Microsoft is like the only person in the game right now that are actually talking about next gen, or Sony's just kind of being like, yeah, we revealed
well,
that logo.
yeah, I mean they kind of don't have to rush to go into that next generation, whereas Xbox kind of wants to in order to get their foot in to the door with like this, their new system of having it all kind of like an online servicing that you pay for. And I think that's kind of the thing, right? With something like Cyberpunk, again, it's futuristic, so it kind of like, goes hand in hand with it. But I think ultimately, like, Xbox is moving to be a lot more pro-consumer, and CD Projekt Red has always been very pro-consumer, and this is just like another example of that. And speaking of which, to kind of move forward, since for people who don't know, CD Projekt Red also own Good Old Games, also known as GOG or GOG. .com, where you can get DRM free games that you can purchase from like various like indie studios to AAA developers. And yeah, they obviously have their game Cyberpunk coming on there. That's where I'm gonna I'm getting the PC edition, so I'm most likely going to be getting like a key for their GOG edition. And DRM free means like it's not going to be on some kind of system such as like a Steam or an Epic Games store, and you can kind of play it on like whatever computer that you want. There's no kind of limitation to it. Now, their website recently updated its refund policy to offer 30-day refund for purchasing a game. And like that's kind of people have been celebrating it online, saying, "Oh, look, it's really good. It's really pro-consumer, giving people the option to kind of choose whether they want to play a game or whether they want to return it and things like that." But then it's also getting a lot of criticism, especially from certain indie game developers, saying, "Hey, like, this is going to just promote more people buying a game, completing it, and then returning it." And but at the same time, like CD Projekt Red, they've said, "Oh well, we're going to be monitoring the situation, and we might like be adjusting the how many day period that we're going to give people a leeway for." But according to their data, it doesn't show that this is the case. There's been like I forget which video game it was, but there was this indie game developer who also kind of thought the same thing, that his game, when they I think Steam, when they introduced the refund policy where, oh, you can return a game after 2 hours or something like that, or like or if you haven't played it for 7 days. I think that's the minimum.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't played the game, he found that, well, a lot of people played the game and then they beat it under the period and then they didn't return it. So he kind of saw that, oh well, people who actually care and support the game, they will purchase it, and anybody who wants to take advantage of a system, and doesn't really want to pay for your game in the first place, they're always not going to be your customer, right?
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And I completely agree. Like, piracy, I think people who pirate games or movies or software or programs or whatever it may be, ultimately, there was a really good study I remember reading. Well, actually, I think it was like conducted by the EU. I actually, I'll pull it up while we're talking about. Can I get a
Could
kind
you
of
get
30-day, the
yeah
30-day period?
mm,
What do
yeah?
you think about that?
Well, that's the thing. It's like it's I think it's good. I think 30 days is fine because or like I think maybe it's even too big at the same time because it's like you really are playing with stuff. I think there's even a few schemes around for other kind of things as well where they just say, I think 5 hours, 10 hours. I feel like more like, or I think, or even as you were saying, I think there was like one other company that was saying you can only play like the game's free, but you can only play 1 hour a day. So there's like all
Hmm.
these type of schemes that I guess these people are trying to figure out of like what's the best optimal way to get money out of things, but also to not lose it. I think maybe 30 days is relatively generous. But
Mhm.
essentially, there are schemes out there that say kind of the more longer time period you give someone to return something, or like a money back guarantee or insurance, a lot of the times they do forget about it because it's 30 days.
Mhm.
That's why when people say, oh, sign up for this thing and give a trial for like, I don't know, 2 weeks to like a month, or they just say, oh, like some people just say a year, and they're just like, at any time you can cancel within that year. Majority of the people will just be like, I'm going to sign up for something, and then I'll roll over after that free thing, and then you'll get kind of charged. So I feel like
Yeah.
something like that might happen, but this is an individual purchase, so that's why I think it's a little bit different, especially when
Yeah.
it could hurt developers and things like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm definitely on the mindset that yeah, while it's consumer friendly, it's maybe a little bit too much. Like, because 30 days is a long time, and I don't think people need 30 days in order to decide whether they want to return a game or not, especially if they've been playing it. The kind of implication is like, yeah, maybe there's like that niche scenario where you buy a game and you've been busy for like 20 days and you haven't played this game and you no longer want to play it, and so you return it and get your money back. Like for those people, like yeah, maybe that would be like the one useful thing, but like that kind of is such a small case. I think a 7 day period is fine. Like I remember that used to be the case at EB Games, and I think still is. From memory, I haven't really bought a game through EB Games in so long. I might be for Cyberpunk, who knows, depending on what their pre-order stuff is. But like they had a 7 day refund policy, which was, you could play the game or whatever, but so long as maybe they don't allow you to have the game open anymore. I don't know, but I think I remember it being the case that if you had opened the game, you could still return it and get a full money return for it.
Well,
If it's
I do
within
know
seven
that I
days.
do know they have one where I think it's like a week or 2 weeks. Like it depends on like
Mm,
what like tier you are, but
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's like if you're like the level 4 tier in like EB Games, like I think you had like 2 weeks that you could return a game, and then like if you were just a normal person, you have like 1 week.
one
Which,
week.
like,
Yeah,
depending on which game it is, like, you could easily, like, if you
yeah,
really wanted
yeah,
to, you could easily just be like, a shooter. Most of the time, the campaign plays for that much, and if you didn't care about multiplayer, you could
yeah.
easily go through a
Exactly.
game in like 2 days and be like, I'm returning it, bam, done.
Exactly. And I think like yeah, those people I think still make the minority when it comes to the purchasing of games and stuff like that. And ultimately I think the issue is like a lot of these big major companies see that um every single game or every single movie or that someone watches where they haven't like it equals to one lost sale, right? Like as in let's say they pirated Sonic, that means they lost $20 because that person didn't buy a ticket for it, whereas the reality is that person would just not have watched it. That's far more likely. And yeah, like I've put up the study that I was referring to. So it's estimating the displacement rates of copyrighted content in the EU. Now, this was commissioned by by the European Union in order to kind of see the kind of effects of music, books, and video games and movies. But this was essentially like a buried study because someone had to actually get like I think it was like a freedom of information request in order to get the results of this particular study. But it was conducted between 2014 and 2015. And essentially, it concluded saying, in general, the results do not show robust statistical evidence of displacement of sales by online copyright infringements. That doesn't necessarily mean that piracy has no effect, but only that the statistical analyst does not prove with sufficient reliability that there is a effect. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a company doesn't, lose something when somebody watches a movie or a video game, but it's only that for the most part, it doesn't seem like piracy affects the industry as predominantly as these kind of greedy multinational corporations trying to make it out to be. Now, mind you, this study was actually funded for 360,000 euros, and they didn't release the results. So that kind of goes to show, like, I wonder why, right? And even with a lot of other kind of, I was reading elsewhere that a lot of piracy um, does actually result in people going and purchasing content made based off the thing that people were pirating. So
Mm.
that was the case apparently for Game of Thrones. Like people who were pirating Game of Thrones were still buying a lot of like memorabilia and like souvenirs and things regarding. And yeah, so that just kind of goes to show that obviously we don't condone kind of piracy and stuff here, but like ultimately, I don't think this kind of policy that allows people to be more flexible with their purchasing rights um, is a bad thing, and it won't lead to more piracy. I don't think so. Maybe people will manipulate it. My preference would probably be maybe just give them 7 days. Because I think
Yeah,
seven
I
days
think
is
maybe
enough,
like a
right?
fortnight or even 7 days. Like at least obviously have the intent of returning it. It depends if
Yeah.
you want to do a whole thing out of like a day, for example. Like either you want to do like a week thing, or you, as I mentioned, it's slightly different than like a movie or something. But you can definitely
Well,
do
you see,
You can definitely do hours played. Like I feel like 5 hours is a good
hours
solid
played.
time to give someone.
Wait, well, you see, that's what I'm saying. That's technically, I think, that's kind of like what Valve's system is, right? Like, because Valve kind of introduced well, actually, I think it was Origin first, because Valve actually were like, "Fuck you, you don't get refunds," right? Initially,
Yeah,
where
which I think
people
is
were
against
pretty,
the Australian consumer thing, and then like basically Australia pushed all this stuff through because like our laws are just like, yeah, nah, that's not
yeah,
happening.
very, very very consumer first, right? And so essentially, they kind of then adopted a very similar kind of refund policy to Origin, where they said like, oh well, um, if you play a game, I think it's 2 hours, 2 hours playtime, or you've bought the game and then not played it for 7 days, whichever comes first, right? So if you play the game for like 1 hour and then you don't play the game for 6 days, you're still eligible for a refund through Valve. Whereas with there doesn't seem to be like at least from the press release, there doesn't seem to be a hour limit. It seems to be like a day limit. So technically, I guess you could allow for people to like if you have it for like 30 days, you play the game like 10 hours every day, and maybe for 29 days you get 290 hours, and then you're like, oh well, I'm gonna refund it. I think that will be an example of where GOG will be like, look, we're not, because they even said like they may not allow you to get a refund, and I think if you're manipulating or taking advantage of the
Yeah,
system, like
and
you're
I
gonna
think
lose.
I think it would be obvious if like they probably have some sort of what is it, like everyone's accounts, they already know how much they play and
Oh
what,
yeah,
right? They have all that
yeah,
data,
yeah.
so then they'd be looking at like, okay, this person's done this twice. Clearly, this person is like abusing the system, so like we'll like penalize them or whatever it is. Like I think like
I,
that's
I
probably
think
gonna, like, if they're gonna target the minority of people who would do that, you know.
and I think at the same time, like there's also option of people purchasing a game and then subsequently maybe refunding it, but they've installed the game onto their PC, so they technically have the game because it's DRM free, right? So yeah, I think ultimately, like yeah, like we obviously want to also think about people who create the video games as well, because obviously if they get shafted, like that's gonna dissuade people from ever wanting to make a video game ever, right?
Yeah.
So I'm definitely I definitely understand, and so maybe if they make it like maybe like a bigger hour volume, like maybe if they do like it's 7 hours and then 7 days, that's how long you get. That would probably be my kind of thing. So like whichever comes first, 7 hours, 7 days. That'd be my content update. But otherwise, like yeah, like maybe just reduce the amount of days and maybe give them unlimited hours, like whichever. But yeah, I think ultimately it's a good thing. I think it's really cool that there is a movement towards trying to make the platform and video games in general more accessible and more flexible, rather than having it fall into the control of corporations telling you how you should play your video games, or we want you to play it through our streaming service or our streaming network and stuff.
It's always about
Yeah,
control.
it is in the end. But speaking of video games, there was a leak that came out about a new Star Wars game called Star Wars Project Maverick. It's got like a really cool, funky logo in it. It's got like
Maverick.
yeah, Maverick, correct.
Like the
Um,
what is it? Mel Gibson gambling
top, top.
movie in Cowboys.
Oh, I was thinking, was it in? I thought it was in Top Gun. I thought isn't one character called Maverick in Top Gun, or
That
am I
as
thinking
well.
of the wrong? Yeah, um, yeah. So there's not much that's come out of it, but it seems like a pretty interesting idea. Like, a lot of people, oh, maybe it's a like an updated version of like Rogue Squadron, which was a kind of a game where you played as like X-wings and TIE fighters and shit.
Well, here's the
Um,
thing. I looked up the logo. The
yeah.
logo is very like I honestly like I know it's kind of a Star Wars logo, but to me the way it kind of looks looks like the Han Solo logo, like in a
Mm-hmm.
way like the
It
movie,
does.
like it's got that kind of yellowy tinge. Like I know it's Star Wars, but it kind of looks like it. So
Yeah, yeah,
maybe
like the
and
design.
with
I'm pretty.
the obviously the word connotations with Maverick, maybe it's something to do with bounty hunter stuff, but I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, like I think in the end, I think it's very up in the air in regards to what exactly this is, because this was essentially, I think, leaked from like the PlayStation Network. Um, and at the moment, like, there's not really any additional news about like, hey, like, what is the game about? Is it set somewhere? All we can kind of guess is like, oh well, it's red. It's got like, could it be set in Mustafar? Is it set like on some other red
This
planet?
could just be an easy like little $5 game that no one really cares about, and we're
Yeah,
blowing it out
yeah,
of proportion as well.
exactly. Because this could easily just be some kind of mobile card game, based based
And then
on
we've
Star
spent all
Wars.
this time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, look, I'm okay with being wrong, but I think like any particular attempt for Star Wars to make a game is a good thing, I guess. I'm trying to be positive because I'm gonna come up with a lot of bad Star Wars stuff in just a moment. But I got one more cool thing. This is just some additional news. So this 11-year-old got a prosthetic arm that's designed around R2D2, and she got a call from Mark Hamill, which is super super cool and very very wholesome. Usually we don't have a lot of wholesome news here, but I thought,
Definitely
um,
not. We're
you
all
know,
depressed here.
yeah, I want to give everybody a palate cleanser, but it's really cool. Like it actually looks like like an R2D2 styled like prosthetic arm, and she can use it to like play like like simple like basketball and like pick up stuff. This is the cyberpunk future that we live in. And you know, and I think it's also super dope that she got a call from Mark Hamill.
Yeah, I think Mark
Um,
Hamill's one of those like he's very friendly with his fans. Because even like one of the
Very
people,
pro fan.
yeah,
He's
very pro
very
fan. Even like what do you call it? He's like one of the guys from RGN, and I've actually met him. And he runs a podcast and everything.
mm,
He was talking about like he has a kid and he was trying to name all the Star Wars characters, and he said Luke Skywalker's like the little kid was like, what's Luke Skywalker's name? And he's like basically Gloop. That's basically what the
Gluck.
kid said Luke's name is, and then obviously he tweeted that, and then Mark Hamill responded back, and then basically it had this whole thing where it's just like it's a really cool thing where like you can connect to celebrities, I guess, and especially for people who are very pro fan like Mark Hamill. He'll probably reply back and he'll have all these things like basically a lot. He basically does reply back to a lot of stuff if he wants to.
And I think Mark Hamill controls his own Twitter, so I think that's also like part of it as well. Like as opposed to like having someone on your social media team, kind of interacting with fans and pretending to be like that's the kind of person he is. But I guess now we have to go into the bad Star Wars news because there's always something.
Is it me or is
There's
it
always
always
something.
bad most of the time?
Well, this is just the direction that Disney is going towards, right? Well, the first thing is Bob Iger, who is Disney's executive chairman, is stepping down and giving it over to another Bob called Bob Chapek, who I think was running like the Disney parks and stuff. So that's obviously a really bad sign for Disney, and well, not necessarily for Bob Iger, but in terms of having a vision going forward in terms of Star Wars and stuff. Like we actually had something similar happen within DC Comics as well, where Dan DiDio, who he was like a major I guess kind of visionary within the DC publishing network. Them kind of dropping him despite him having a pretty large, extensive kind of I guess catalog within DC and
Like
control
been there
of
for years, controlling I guess a lot of kind of the behind the scenes stuff of where the direction of the company would go. You know.
yeah, and yeah, now they've gotten rid of him. So yeah, it's really it's never really a good sign when you see kind of big wigs kind of leaving because it might spell bad things going forward. One of these potential bad things. Now, honestly, I actually didn't think this was that bad when I initially saw it. But it was one of those things where I was like, the more I looked into it, the more worse it seemed. And it's this concept of, and I think you've probably heard of it, Don. It's called the Star Wars High Republic Initiative, which is essentially Star Wars High Republic. So it's essentially like
But initiative makes it sound cooler.
it does actually make it sound a little bit cooler. But essentially, it's Disney's new project in which they're getting writers and creators to develop stories within the Star Wars timeline. They got people to Skywalker Ranch and they got a big whiteboard with all the things that they want to put in the show and stuff like that. And it's supposed to be set like 200 years before the Phantom Menace. So it's why it's called like the High Republic because it's supposed to be in a period of time where
It's not the old
golden
Republic,
era.
everyone. It's the High
High
Republic.
Republic. Yeah, so it's it's supposed to imply like, oh well, this is a period where the Jedi and the Republic was at their kind of peak, right, in terms of like power and stuff, and them trying to explore the galaxy. I think that's what it's going to be a lot about. It's going to be maybe exploring a lot of planets, ideas, concepts. And to be honest, I kind of actually dig the name. I think High Republic does sound pretty cool. But like, yeah, ultimately, I keep going back to, oh wait, like I have to remember that this is being put into the hands of usually people who maybe don't really like as Star Wars in like the more traditional way, and they want to kind of change it from
Well,
what it.
basically, the modern Star Wars is we want to, and especially the people, I guess you would say, a few people at Lucasfilm is we want to mold Star Wars the way we want to see it, or like as in like the way we are, rather than having it being like this is what Star Wars means and represents. It's more like what can we do with this property, basically. And I feel like that's kind of
Right, I
in
get it.
general,
Like,
that's what it really comes down to. Instead of being like, it really is like fan expectations or having something extended universe, something that will call back to something really great in fandom. But now it's kind of like a lot of the writers, and you can even see this in modern Marvel as well, where it's, hey, we have this property that already has an established fan base, as something already established, but let's try to do something completely different with it, and mold it into something that we want.
mhm. Yeah, well, I think in a very similar way, like they even say here that like it's supposed to be set in a time like it's almost like the Wild West, right? A new frontier in the galaxy. As a quote here, we see a different kind of Jedi that patrols the frontiers and is more of a Texas Ranger. Like, you see, I actually don't mind that. That actually sounds
Yeah,
pretty
that
cool.
sounds
I
cool.
think
Yeah, that sounds great.
I,
The premise so far, that sounds pretty
ultimate,
good.
ultimately, my personal opinion is the problem is what they should have done is they should have made High Republic um, after Episode 9, if that makes sense. And canonically had just said, "Hey, you know what? Ray managed to work with other, Jedi people and reestablished the Jedi Order. Um, Managed to bring balance to the Force, and this is 200 years where they're re-exploring like the Outer Rim, and they're exploring all these planets again, and trying to restabilize the galaxy, and that's why they're going everywhere." Whereas this is more like, oh well, we're gonna set it in the past because it doesn't have anything to do with any of that future stuff. Like because this whole concept of the High Republic and having, and this is what I hate about it, because this was the exact idea that I wanted to actually do for my Dungeons and Dragons game for Star Wars, which was it's
Man,
essentially
they listen to our podcast and they're just like,
no.
hey,
Well,
we know.
Did I mention? I don't know if
No,
I mentioned my
but every
idea.
time when we talk on Discord, they listen to our stuff. They know.
Oh yeah, that's true. They sell our data, right?
Yeah,
No, because that's essentially what I wanted to do. Where it was, oh well, it's kind of the rise and return of, the Jedi, but then at the same time the return of the Sith. However, from my understanding, I don't think the Sith are the main bad guys. Apparently, it's a group called the Nile, which I thought was like a really weird name. I thought they could
it
maybe
sounds very
go.
Egyptian to me.
Yeah, right. Like I don't know, it seems really out of place. I think they should have gone with a different name, but they kind of look like Mad Max, like cool cyber guys, which I thought is pretty cool. So like, again, like, and the thing is, at the same time, they're kind of having like a bunch of different publishers across different comic book companies, um, make content regarding the High Republic. And I think this basically seems like they're just trying to see what they can make and see what sticks, and then and they even said, I can't find the exact quote at the moment, but essentially they will be making things and maybe making movies based on what people end up liking and purchasing and buying. And so that's the thing. So it's kind of going like a shotgun approach, right? They're just kind of, all right, we're just gonna throw everything up against the wall and just see what sticks.
Yeah, it reminds me of what Square Enix did with, I think they kind of did it twice. They did it with, I think it's called Ivalice, which is basically Final Fantasy Tactics, Vagrant Story, and Final Fantasy 12 are actually technically all in the same universe. So it's kind of under this semi banner of like different, like kind of like where this is kind of in the same type of period world, and this is kind of what we have established. Or even like with Final Fantasy 13, the original intent was Final Fantasy 13 was originally going to be there. Then there was going to be Versus 13 that turned out to be 15, and then I think there was a few of the spin-offs as well. I think one's called like it was one about a school. That's all
Mm.
technically all in the same universe as well. Where it's kind of like, okay, we'll have this banner of like the High Republic. We'll have all these kind of spin-off like movies, like or like books it'll originally be, and it'll be comic books. And then if there's traction for one or the other or something like that, they'll kind of initially make it something out of it and make a brand name out of it. So I feel like when people talk about Star Wars, they're like, oh, the High Republic, series or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like that's a good way to kind of establish a way different from all the other Star Wars stuff, but at the same time making an initial banner on it. And that's the thing. I'm not opposed to it at the current moment. I think just like there are a lot of YouTube videos and a lot of things picking out what the writers, their whole kind of like what is it called, like like mindscaping board of being like, what do we want out of this series? What do we think that we can do with
Oh
this
yeah,
series?
yeah. Well, I've got a list of it over here. Some of it's pretty cool, but some of it is like pretty stupid. Like for example, under Star Wars, it literally says not pro-war. So like in a show called Star Wars, they're supposed to have
Wars.
like it's supposed to have an anti-war like slant, I guess, is what they mean. This is me trying to be like charitable to this kind of
Yeah, I think
interpretation,
essentially what
right?
it means is like, hey, there's some like war conflict going on, but obviously the main people, aka the Jedi or whatever they call themselves, are anti-war, which they've always
Anti-war.
been, really.
Yeah,
Um,
but I think ultimately like there's nothing wrong with exploring like tales where people like maybe there is like a Jedi who loves the fact that there's war, or are we gonna have like bounty hunters and they're like do they like wars like mercenaries and so like bounty hunters would have been mercenaries, right? Like as well, like they're kind of from the same basket. Like like that's what makes Star Wars interesting is that there isn't this kind of like obviously the Jedi good, Sith bad, but then everybody's kind of in between because they're not this kind of they don't fall on this kind of right or wrong spectrum. Like it's part of the reason why we like Han Solo, because he's a good guy, but then he does some pretty bad shit
He's
as
in it.
well.
He's in it for the money, you know.
Yeah, he's in, and like even Leia, Leia's a good character, like goes without saying, but like she kind of does things in her own kind of underhanded way, and um she's not against getting dirty in order to survive, right? Like she literally chokes Jabba with her own like slave chain in a fucking bikini, right? The space bikini, no less. So yeah, like they
Spikini.
it's bikini, right? So like they're not against like all these kind of characters don't have this whole like we're anti-war. It's like, well, we're doing this because we have to kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what whereas like yeah, like the evil and this is the thing. Maybe you might make a antagonist down the line who also thinks that they don't want to do this but they have to, and that's where they kind of conflict. Like I think they technically have that with like Saul Guerrero, who's like he's kind of like the character
In Rogue
who
One,
is
yeah, yeah. Where
he's in
where
Rogue One, he's
where
in a lot of media.
basically, but that's the thing. But he's also a character got cut out of Rogue One quite a bit. But I
Yeah.
know he's in the new game somewhere.
Yeah. So he's in the new game. He's in like the Star Wars Clone Wars TV series. He's essentially like he's a rebel, but he's kind of considered like an extremist rebel. Like he's willing to sacrifice himself or people in order for the cause, right? So again, like his character is more interesting because they're actually kind of pushing him towards being like almost like almost like a terrorist, right? Which is essentially what all these like rebels are seen in the eyes of the Empire, but like he's almost seeing like almost like a like one that you can't necessarily agree with his tactics, which is obviously what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to contrast him with other people in the show. But like, yeah, if you want to have complex characters, like not having a well, we're going to be not pro-war and have that go out as a theme where everybody is against war. It's really weird. Another thing is like one of the other things is like, oh, diversity, and they have it twice. Like Star Wars is already diverse. It's like it seems like a non sequitur
Well, my whole
to
thing
even
is like
say that.
diverse. I don't want it diverse in the sense of like our equivalent to diverse and like our modern equivalent. What I would like is diverse in like, and I've kept on talking about this even with the Force Awakens. I want diverse aliens. Like I want more aliens. Like I'm kind of sick of more like humanoids and humans being the main characters. I really do want like. Once again, we're in space. It's science
Mm.
fantasy as well. Like, why can't like I think in the cover they just showed there's a Wookiee there. I'm like, yeah, cool. Have a
Mm.
Wookiee as like one of the main characters, or like what I want is, or like any other type of race. Like I think, I would think it would be a lot better. Just to have more.
I'm
I
think
just like not even droids either. I just want more aliens as people. I know there's probably a logistical behind the scenes
there's
thing of
yeah.
like
Look, honestly, I think it's like a CG problem because
but
I
that's the
think
thing. If
ultimately
these are
anybody
books originally, there is no limit. Like, what is stopping someone to be like, okay, I forgot the race, but they kind of have these
Twi'leks.
big meaty ponytail
Yeah,
things.
Twi'leks.
Yeah, like
Or
what?
whatever what's their face. Anyway, yeah, it's Twi'leks. I'm pretty sure that's
Yeah.
what you're
Like,
referring
why
to.
can't that be like the main characters? Like,
Well, I was about to say like Twi'lek females within the Star Wars universe have some pretty extensive lore. Like I've read it up because like it's their whole kind of race they're very pro slavery. So like that could have been something that's explored within the context of the universe and kind of doing a lesson. Like that's kind of what like Star Trek did. They kind of talked about how like it's like they're a post human society where and a post scarcity society where they don't have to worry about running out of food and stuff like but then coming into contact with other races and having to kind of be civil and showing the lessons and contrasting it with like modern society and how like within the universe they've like quote unquote advanced and moved past like minor trivialities like slavery and racism. Like it's like we've moved past that and moved beyond it, and this is meant to be like the contrast for it. I don't know if they'll end up doing it because ultimately like with things like having humanoid characters obviously makes it easier for the audience to kind of implant themselves as it being like the audience surrogate, right? But yeah, like we'll have to see. I think ultimately, they might have aliens, but they'll just be like really lazy aliens. Like it's a human, but it's green
Or
now,
they'll do a
right?
thing where it's like, yeah, in the background somewhere, and they don't really have much time. But as I mentioned before,
Yeah,
these are books originally in comic books, so like
yeah, books, comic
they
books,
can
stuff like
kind
that.
of they can do whatever they want with it, and it doesn't have the limit of like someone's gonna do makeup and CGI on this thing. That's
Well,
why
yeah,
like this
but
one they have it
ultimately,
open to do it.
yeah, but ultimately the goal is to create something and then eventually have it be created and adapted into a TV show slash movie series. That's what it ultimately comes down to. Like even it even says here, in on the whiteboard it says actual ending, which seems like a bit of a uh, I guess slight against the movie series because it's like, well, yeah, the ending was pretty shit and nobody really liked it.
Yeah, like
Um,
actual ending. Like I think that's a sentiment there. It's like, yeah, Lucasfilm and yeah, Disney in general right now is kind of like in a whole like I feel like in a war. They obviously they don't really. It's not really that public, but I can feel like there's probably different camps. Yeah, especially in
mhm.
Lucasfilm of like we prefer it to do this way and we prefer it to do that way. Like I'm definitely Team Filoni and John Favreau. Whatever they're doing, they're probably the best people out of Lucasfilm at the current moment, and they've proven themselves to be. And I feel like
Mhm.
just let them do their thing, and maybe more stories should be kind of like the Mandalorian in a way, and maybe like so far the whiteboard and what they're having there, like for example, dinosaurs. I'm like I know this is like a brainstorming thing. It's really semi supposed to criticize brainstorming because it's very like open ended,
Yeah,
but
yeah, it's
but I feel like
open.
there's a lot of things missing of kind of like we want X or we want this or we want like maybe some origin stuff or as I mentioned like fan fulfillment or like there could have had all these things where it's like since you're in a new age that hasn't been touched in Star Wars before, we can really go out and like do something interesting and it could be like innovative or something like that rather than just being like,
Mm.
oh, we want it to we want to have rival houses, so it kind of
I
makes you
think
feel like there's going to be like a like Harry Potter
Harry
tinge
Potter
to it or
element.
something.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing, right? Like ultimately, it seems that there is a desire to kind of move forward with Star Wars, but because they fucked it up so badly, they have to go back, right? And the thing is, they had already an extensive library of lore from the Star Wars universe, in the form of, the legend, canon, right? Now, they have actively chosen not to pursue a lot of these storylines, and characters, which makes me seem to believe that, like, like not all the characters, like some character, like Thrawn, for example, appeared in the Star Wars Legend um, uh, cartoon, right? So and he was like the first major villain in like the the first set of books that ever came out after the original movie. So he was like the big villain. He's like the blue dude with like red eyes, really dope. But like him, for example, like yeah, they took him from the books and put him in there. So like yeah, clearly Disney isn't against using properties from the Legends universe. I think the problem is like maybe they don't want to rely on it, and I wonder if that has to do with oh, they have to pay Lucas more money every time they use something from the Legend universe. This was a very similar argument that I think not only I made, but like certain people from the industry. I think like Midnight's Edge on YouTube, like they did a pretty good video that I saw like months ago, and I talked about it here. That like originally they wanted to kind of move away from like alien creatures from that universe because they may not potentially get all the merchandising rights and all the profit rights and stuff or the cut from using those creations. So they want to make original creatures and original creations, which is what we're seeing in a lot of the newer, some new aliens and
But at
new
that
kind of.
point, what's the point of even having the the rights to it if you're gonna hamper it because oh yeah we're not gonna make money? It's like you're making it worse in the like the cost benefit is like you're making it worse for not having these traditional Star Wars things in it. It's just purely because like oh well we don't want to pay this. It's like why did you pay for the license
It,
to kind of have it
yeah,
in a
yeah.
way where it's like it makes it worse in the end. And even then you're creating these new things that like we have to kind of like where it's like probably the best thing that's happened out of the new Star Wars, like alien race wise, has probably been Babu Frick, and even then, that's like a little small thing. Like Yoda in itself, Baby Yoda, is still a Yoda thing, and they probably hate it. It's like, oh god damn it! Like the best thing that everyone liked was an actual traditional thing that's been in Star Wars before. Like, and they're just
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
god damn it! Now
exactly.
traditional stuff hasn't worked. Like
Well,
BB-8
I
is like
think
a whatever really, and like all the other aliens have been kind of whatever. So it's like, yeah, it like just use what you have. It's such a great world that you don't need to even make anything more new.
well, but I think ultimately they're going down that direction where they're just trying to make their own things and try and see where it goes. I think it's a mistake setting it in the past. I wish they would have just like been like, you know what, episode 9 and stuff. It doesn't matter anymore. You see, I think at the same time they want to make it so that it's open, so that they could do something after episode 9. But I think the correct thing would have been it's set 200 years after episode 9 and not before episode 1. I would much rather, I would have much more respect if they had done that, because that's like, okay, hey, that's acknowledging we fucked up, but now there's a new order. Let's move forward. And then that actually would give a lot more creative freedom for people, because then they're not restricted to the past as much, because it would have been like whatever 300 years ago. But speaking of things that Disney does like to pick and choose from the canon universe, it was actually confirmed in the novelization of the Star Wars Rise of Skywalker movie, that the Palpatine that we see in Episode 9 is actually a clone and not the original Palpatine slash Darth Sidious.
Okay, what's the
Um,
point of even doing like reviving him if it's just going to be a clone? Which like, it is a good, it's a cop out, but at least it's a good cop out that at least makes certain segment of the YouTube like of like people who like the Star Wars like happy in a sense where it's like,
I
when
don't think so. I don't think.
because I think with the some of the
No.
complaints were just like, okay, then like Palpatine's back.
Oh,
You
like how
literally
did he
you literally
survive?
like
Do you
ruined like
mean?
Luke's legacy. That was all for nothing, including Vader. But at least being
Well,
like,
but
okay, the original's dead. Someone cloned him somehow. Like,
yeah, but that's the thing. Like in the end, it's still that. It's like, well, Palpatine's not really dead. It's his clone, but he's not really dead. So they don't actually. They make his what is it? Anakin sacrifice doesn't mean as much, because they would just had this clone anyways, right? So I think either way, it's bad writing. But the problem is the whole Palpatine surviving, like in the original, I think canon legend series, um, Palpatine, who died in the Death Star, was a clone, and the real Palpatine was elsewhere, right? So it's kind of like they did the opposite, but they still had clones, and everybody universally hated the concept of Palpatine having a clone and surviving and stuff like that. And it's no different. And this is the thing: when it comes to picking stuff out of the canon universe, they pick the shit things, the stuff that people didn't like. I mean, and the thing is, originally, according to the Ian McDermott, who plays Palpatine, he said in regards to the cloning, when all the news and stuff came out, he said, "quote The cloning thing, yes, well, of course, there are all sorts of explanations of why I might return, but it's interesting because at one point the script had a line in the first scene with Adam, as in Adam Driver, who, when he says, 'You're a clone,' and I said in the original script, which is no longer with us, 'more than a clone, less than a man,' which seemed to sum it up really. So yeah, so even in the movie, they initially had some kind of dialogue which confirmed the notion that he was a clone, but then they didn't move forward with actually putting it in there, and that might be due to the fact that we were talking about how, like, there was a lot of issues with production, and how there was a lot of things being cut in and cut out, and the final cut is a lot different to the one that JJ wanted, and it was more in line with what the studio wanted or something or other. So that might be also. But at the same time, the the Rise of Skywalker novelization also revealed that in the final moment between Rey and Kylo Ren, when he revived her from dying, so to speak, uh, and they kissed, which I think everybody was just like, wow, that came out of nowhere, and that felt really forced, and that reinforces really negative relationships between people, because he's like a stalker slash person who killed her mentor kind of thing.
There's a lot
In
of
the
things going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that's really weird about that whole rushed aspect of it. And in the novelization, they say that the kiss is non-romantic, which is really weird.
Well,
I
yeah,
see
I
it.
think that sounds like a retcon to me.
Right? Doesn't it sound? All of this shit sounds like it's retcons. Like, oh well, Palpatine was alive because we have to put a villain here, and because
Because
Ryan Johnson killed
originally,
Snoke.
like, we put this there, but it wasn't a good idea now since like everything's out, so we can change it. It's like DLC, but we can't officially change it for like a game. And it's like even if like yeah, I think it's obviously it's supposed to appease some sort of crowd, and they didn't like it, or like they liked it, but like
Well,
everyone else is
no,
like,
yeah,
yeah, I don't know what the hell's
yeah,
going
it's like,
on. So
oh
like
yeah,
it,
like all the, well, it's all those, it's like people who ship characters together, right? Oh, I like this person getting together, but it's like, yeah, no, like, not every person has to like get into a relationship. Like that doesn't being in a relationship doesn't necessarily have to be a story arc in a movie, especially over 3 films. And yeah, like, look, and this is the thing, like, again, ultimately, this comes right back to the poor directing, writing, I guess, production of Episode 8, The Last Jedi, which was done by director Ryan Johnson, who everybody, kind of anybody who is worth their salt in opinion in terms of Star Wars hates Episode 8. And recently in a interview with the Hollywood Reporter, he was, they were discussing and talking about his film Knives Out. And during the film, they were asking questions about Star Wars. The question that was asked to him by the Hollywood Reporter was, whenever you are writing, let's say you are creating your own universe, you said you don't think about actors, you're starting something from scratch. How is that approach versus something where you have a pre-existing universe? If you are writing characters for Star Wars, you have this universe, you have these characters that everybody knows, and then now you have to do something from scratch. Do you find that approach different for that? And he responds, no, not at all, because I don't think in terms of universes or in terms of creating worlds or whatever. That's not interesting to me. He kind of goes on and the only thing that's interesting to me is story. The story specific to, like, whether you are writing a Star Wars film or something that's part of a 3 movie trilogy or quote unquote original film like Knives Out, you are telling a story that is new, and the thing you are trying to do, to the thing you're trying to do, that it has to work within the context of that movie. So to me, the notion of what's the entire galaxy or world that you are creating or something, I can't imagine getting excited about creating that. To me, what I'm excited about is creating a 2 hour long experience for an audience to have in a theater, and that means they have to engage moment to moment with the story and the characters that are on the screen, and that doesn't change in either of those things. So I think the kind of big thing that you can kind of that's glaringly obvious about this really pretentious response that he gives to the creation of a film is he cares more about creating something from scratch when it comes to when it comes to the entertainment of a general audience rather than being restricted by kind of maybe what he might consider like an archaic canon or like a world. Like when there's a universe to create, he doesn't really care about the universe. He wants to have a story and he wants to tell that story, and that prioritizes over the world
Hmm.
storytelling over the which necessarily I don't think is a bad thing, but I think in the way that he presents it in this, again, really pretentious response to a very simple question, he essentially just says, well, yeah, fuck it, I only care about telling my story first, and if you care about the world, well, that's second.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. As I agree with you and agree with him in the sense of like, yeah, if a writer or director has a vision, essentially for something like a new IP or things like that, I feel like, yeah, go ahead. That's the whole point of the thing. But however, since he has established canon and there is a certain amount of expectations, and on top of all this, being a middle movie in a planned trilogy, so a continuation story, um, it basically just shows bad foresight from Kathleen Kennedy and other people, where it's like he's the type of director where he will never make a sequel, even though he's making sequels to Knives Out, but it's going to be just Daniel Craig's character is going to be literally just the only through line. Everything else
Yeah,
is
yeah.
going to be
Well,
original and new. So he
yeah.
was the complete worst choice for a middle movie, or not to mention in any sense of having a through line story that will last longer than like and have an expectation with a franchise. So for example, like he will never get hired for like a Marvel movie, or like like he will get hired for a DC movie if it was like the Joker, for example, where it's like it's a one-off. Go do that. That sounds great. But like he won't be a thing where it's like, okay, we want you to make the Justice League. Like he'll never get hired for something like that. And it really just shows that like he's going to make a Star Wars trilogy, which I'm assuming is either going to like, and if he wants to make a story about one thing or another thing, I don't know how that works, or maybe it's just because it's the Star Wars that he wants to make over the Star Wars, as I mentioned, the Star Wars feeling that we and most people do have when they think of Star Wars. He'll make it into something different, where it's like we'll make some jokes like all the time, or do this, So like the way the comment sounds is just like he was just he kind of sounds like Josh Trank almost, the guy who was originally going to be doing Rogue One. He did Chronicle, and he obviously did Fantastic Four. And he kind of dropped out because he was one of those people where he was just like he couldn't deal with the stress, because he's like, I made a Fantastic Four movie, that was my vision, and I didn't get to do it. Which, you can say yes or no to like if he was allowed to do it, but it's still the same thing of like it should be the studio heads and all these things that are just selecting like who are these writers and directors, and will they play ball with us if we tell them this is what we need in this universe. And Rian Johnson does not seem at all to be the type of person to make something that that has something that's already established.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like I just don't get it. How I mean it's most likely nepotism and stuff that ultimately like kind of got Rian Johnson due to his connection with Kathleen Kennedy. But like yeah, like ultimately just have to see where things go forward with Star Wars. I'm not, as you can tell, I'm not very positive on the direction that it's going to go in, but I'm always open to it getting better with the right kind of creative heads, kind of frontlining it. Uh, in terms of other news, we've got a few kind of cancellation newses. Well, The Magicians, I know you watched The Magicians. That
Yes.
recently got cancelled on Sci-Fi, which, to be honest, what doesn't get cancelled on Sci-Fi
Yeah,
these
I
days?
don't even know what they have left, to be honest with you. Like they must be like trying to keep up their budget for something, whatever's coming in the future. I have no idea, and maybe they'll get bought over by like a Netflix or something. Who knows? But yeah, Magicians canceled. I was a big fan of Magicians. This is like one of those shows where I would tell everyone to kind of watch it, just because it just didn't get the fame that it kind of deserved, or attention that it deserved. With the way I would kind of pitch it, it's kind of like it's based off a bunch of books. There's only 3 books. And the way I'd pitch it is it's basically Harry Potter, but in a university setting, and instead of it being like whimsical and very friendly, it delves into more I guess more adult type themes. Like for example, like the main character Quentin, he has like depression, he has all these kind of self-doubts in himself, so it's like a very unique take on, I guess, a protagonist. On top of that, your magic does have consequences in the world, and it doesn't shy away from it. So there's stuff like if they they summon a demon, that demon's still a demon and it will betray you type of thing. So there's like a lot of that stuff going on where it's very adult. And so it kind of keeps that thing going on as well, because they're at a university, and then obviously it kind of stems off from this because it also has these things where it's a world in a world where this Quentin character, he's obsessed with these books that are based in this fantasy world called Fillory. So it's got the unicorns and all that type of stuff. And what he does find out when he goes to this university, that basically this world is real, and they can go inside. So it's a fantasy world inside of a fantasy world. So it kind of plays on that. And yeah, the characters are really great. Like Quentin's really great. Margot and I forgot his name, but basically they're this awesome dynamic duo that always have good quippy lines and everything. It has all this great establishment. To make a good series, and you know, it lasted 5 seasons. I wish there at least there was maybe one more instead of just being like, hey, the episodes that you're getting currently right now that are airing is all you have. But yeah, I you know, either way, the fans of magicians are very hardcore, like me, and you know, it's sad to see, you know, it's very, they are very talented, the actors and especially the writers, and hopefully the you know, we can see something more, I guess, in this universe because it is very unique.
Yeah, I think that seems to be the case with something like sci-fi, right? Like, you know, they always kind of take on shows that have a very unique slant or a particular niche. You know, like who would have thought? Like, I mean, Harry Potter, a more adult themed Harry Potter already sounds significantly better than most of the Harry Potter movies. But again, this is coming from someone who didn't grow up watching reading Harry Potter, so that's my bias there, right? But you know, just yeah, it sounds more interesting. So yeah,
Yeah,
you know,
and
maybe
yeah,
that might get
it's
picked
got
up.
it's got yeah, it's got a lot of yeah, different great themes. Especially the books. Like I think the books are a lot more, I guess, depressing because, you know, since you have, you know, the you read it in the perspective of Quentin, as I mentioned, who has like a mental illness and things like that. You do feel like his self doubt and things like that, and you know, feel kind of depressed.
Well,
And they
look,
do have that in the TV show, but you know, you do see a lot more stuff going on, and as well of, yeah, just seeing like how horrific sometimes how magic can be, and like, you know, mythical creatures aren't as nice as you think they are. So like,
mm,
you know, shame to see this series go. You know, it did find its audience, just that, yeah, it didn't really hit its mass critical appeal than like something then, you know, like Game of Thrones or something like that. But you know, like, you know, sci-fi shows don't really have that mass appeal.
well,
Like even something like Expanse got cancelled and now
well,
has
that's what
moved
I'm.
into to Amazon.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, you know, maybe they should try and petition Amazon to take up the show. Like, I don't know what their, I guess, episodic, like, kind of viewership is for the show, but if it's good enough, like, maybe that would be enough to kind of get them on it. So, look, you know, that's the kind of streaming world that we live in. You know, maybe being able to kind of switch between who you want to host shows might be the difference between whether a show lives or dies. It just might have like a smaller budget for next season. But yeah, we'll have to see going forward. But speaking of, you know, Game of Thrones, you know, we've been talking about the Watchmen TV show that came out last year. Was it this year? I don't remember. Point is,
It was last year. It was late last
yeah,
year.
late last year. Point is, it was bad. For the most part, I think we both like kind of like maybe like 2 episodes out of like the whatever 13 of whatever that came out. And yeah, you know, comic book CBR. I think it's is it comic book
Comic book
reading
resources.
resources. Yeah. So they recently did put up an article that said HBO's Watchmen wasn't as popular as you think. Which I think like kind of like them like I won't read the article, but I think the main thing that they kind of touch on, which I think kind of, you know, puts it into like view in terms of you know, kind of people watching the show, is they kind of did a contrast between Watchmen, Big Little Lies, Westworld, and Game of Thrones. Um, Game of Thrones. You know, we'll do it like a game. How many people do you think what was watched Game of Thrones on average for the first season?
Oh,
We're talking
first
about first
season.
season.
I'm gonna think like under, like I think it was like a 2 mil probably because it reached that peak potential, but I could be wrong.
No. You're correct. It's 2.5 million people watched
Yeah,
the on average Game of Thrones season one per episode. For Westworld season one, what do you think was the average viewer watch time?
I feel like that's like a 1.8 mil. I think.
Yeah, 1.82 mil.
Wow. Okay
Okay,
then.
for Westworld season one. And now we're going to be talking about Big Little Lies. Now, I don't know anything about this show.
I do. I have watched it.
Is it like a what is it?
It's
Is it?
based off a book, and it just has a really great cast like Nicole Kidman, that girl from Invergent, that series, and a few other casts. But essentially, it's a whole mystery of a
Reese
town.
Witherspoon.
It's
Okay.
basically a mystery of like someone died, and and
Trying to
then
figure out
basically
who.
throughout the season, you kind of plot through the points of who died, and basically how they're going to cover it up. Um,
Okay.
so that's kind of the
So
thing.
how many people do you think watched Big Little Lies on average for
Uh,
its season one?
Honestly, I think just because it has the cast of something like Nicole Kidman, and it probably had some sort of thing. I'm gonna say probably a maybe like around the same range, so maybe like 1.6, 1.7.
1.7? 1.1.
Okay.
1.1 million for Big Little Lies. Now, I hope you're kind of realizing what's happening as I'm going down the list of these
I got a
shows.
feeling Watchmen is like hitting not 1 million people.
Well, look, I'm not going to spoil it just yet. You need to guess how many people on average are watching Watchmen season one.
I swear to God, I did hear a news report that it got some good viewership, but that could have just been inflated, conflated, or whatever it may be.
Could
But
be. I don't know. You
I
won't know
know,
until you
like if it going
guess.
if it's trending all the way down, I would assume that it'd be under maybe around the 700,000 mark, 800,000.
Oh yeah, you're correct. So 759,000 people are watching Watchmen season one, which don't think that's that much
Well,
in terms of like.
especially when you consider that like it like Watchmen has a already pre-established fan base that you would be like,
Hmm.
okay, certain nerd
That's
crowd
true.
people will see this regardless. Like it's basically like you and me. Like we're already kind of established in there. That's already point one for kind of Watchmen in a sense. You'd think it would do really well. You'd say that kind of maybe for Game of Thrones and Song of Ice and Fire, but that I think is like way lower in the scale of like knowledge for people. Big Little Lies, as you mentioned before, you don't even know, and I think a lot of people
No,
didn't really know,
no,
and I think it's
no,
just purely
no.
because of something like Nicole Kidman being in the show, maybe got detractors, and then something like Westworld, which is a completely original idea. That was something that was in development hell that I know for a fact. That first season was filmed in like 2015, 16.
Yeah,
It took
yeah,
forever for
correct.
to come out, but like I knew about it, but most people didn't. But to average something like I forgot what you said before, but to average
1.8,
1.8
million.
is pretty astonishing. I would say for
Yeah.
especially a new IP, for something that's quite original, aside from the movie, of course. But the
Mm.
70s movie. So like for something Watchmen to not even break a million, especially what I would assume would be like the budget would be quite high for what they did.
High. It looked. I'm pretty sure the budget for Watchmen season one.
Yeah, so they probably spent quite a lot of money on it, and they didn't see the return of investment. So then in the end, they just didn't see the return of the show, I guess.
Well, the show is like, oh well, we might come back, kind of thing. But I don't think so. I think there is definitely like uh, uh, maybe it's like a desire to kind of make it seem like the show wasn't a failure. So they're trying to say, oh well, we'll see. We're open to have a sequel, but like realistically and behind closed doors, they're like, this thing isn't going to get a sequel. And once again, Lindelof is awful, and he doesn't make good TV shows, and this kind of proves it. That's my hot take.
Well, yeah, it's just like I'm just shocked that a lot of people are just like, yeah, man, I really like the Watchmen TV show. I'm just like,
Yeah,
do you even
I
know
saw
about the
everyone.
graphic novel? Like, do you like, or is it just something that you've just completely missed the intent of it, or do you just like, I don't know, it's not even it like,
I feel like there's a lot of astroturfing in terms of like trying to get people to like this show. It's like, oh, like every like on again, like I kind of frequent Reddit for all my like kind of news and stuff. So like when I saw like something on like Watchmen, everyone's like, oh, this is like the best show ever, and oh, it's really good. It's like, no, that episode wasn't that good. It's like, no, the acting wasn't that good. Like yeah. I mean,
like, man, I
again,
should have astroturfed the shit out of the magicians. Then maybe people would have goddamn watched it.
no, well, I mean,
Hey, man,
yeah, you need
hey,
to pay
at
people
least magician lasted
astroturfing.
5 seasons. Watchmen won. So who won
That's
out of
true.
this?
I didn't know magicians and Watchmen were having a competition,
Well,
but
now, well, I made it into a thing now.
okay. Well, hey, look, we might get that 4 more seasons of Watchmen. Who knows? But yeah.
Let's hope not.
Now with another piece of news, more positive coming out of DC is Harley Quinn. Season 2 is coming out relatively soon, and I think the thing is, Um, season two, I think, was made back to back with season one. It's almost like they're doing like a heart like a you know what they did for Young Justice season four or whatever,
Mm.
where or is it three? I forget how many
It was
seasons
like
there are.
season 3, yeah.
Season three, where they released half of it and then they released the other half, later on in the year. I think it's a very similar thing where it's like they created this, and they just called the first half season one and they're calling the second half season two because it seems like there's like 13 or 12 episodes of the first season, and then there's going to be like another 13, and a 26 um episode list seems like a typical first season for most kind of like animated TV shows or traditional TV, right?
Yeah, yeah.
um so yeah, like again, it makes sense why it's coming back sooner, and I'm looking forward to it because I think apparently Catwoman is in it. So good to see, what they're going to be doing with that character in terms of like this kind of wacky universe that they got going on, with
Hmm.
Harley Quinn and her shenanigans.
Yeah, like the show's great. And they're probably like fast, like they're probably either they're fast tracking it now, because as I mentioned, this was originally like part of the whole DC universe thing. And since like they've got like HBO Max, this is pretty much more or less taking over from like the DC side of things. Since Swamp Thing is cancelled, Titans, I guess season 3 is coming at a later date, but like Doom Patrol at some point will come out. So like DC wise, they don't really have anything like even something like Starfire moved to CW, so it's kind of like they need something else. So they got Harley Quinn and the animated show, and I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good.
Exactly. Now speaking of Harley Quinn, we also got information that, not me specifically,
Oh
but
man, someone
uh,
just gave you some leaks.
yeah, yeah, this is a hot off the presses from February 28th. No, so essentially, Suicide Squad has finished filming now, and will probably be going into all their post-production stuff. So that's really cool. Um,
Yeah,
and that
more
means the
Suicide Squad.
movie,
That's what I want.
yeah, and that means hopefully the movie will be coming out like sometime next year, right?
Yep.
Or even at the end of this. No, maybe that's too
No, no,
optimistic,
I don't
right?
think so. I think their plan is to maybe hit where like Birds of Prey hit, but maybe now since Birds of Prey didn't do so well, they're just like maybe June next year or
Maybe
something
June
like that.
next year. Oh, man, I don't know. I would have really loved to see Suicide Squad come out this year.
Either way, like I think maybe they'll do a whole thing for Comic Con. I think since the filming's already wrapped up, Comic Con's in like June, July. They'll
Mhm.
do some sort of special effects, and they'll probably do like a 30-second trailer type of thing. I think. I wouldn't be
Yeah,
surprised.
that's true. That's true. It wouldn't be too surprising for them to kind of have something to keep people like excited in the kind of Suicide Squad like IP. Keep it in the zeitgeist, so to speak. Because that's essentially what's been happening with Batman recently. Because we've just been getting back-to-back kind of news, released by Matt Reeves and co, regarding the Batman. The first is, we initially saw the test screen release of like Batman and how he looked in it. People were like, oh, he kind of looks like Daredevil. He kind of looks like blah
I
blah
think the
blah.
problem is you couldn't see the ears, like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
the horn slash ears, like they were kind of cut off from it. So
Exactly. Whereas we finally got some looks of what I believe is like a stunt performer in the bat suit, driving a motorcycle.
he does fall
Um,
down, which is pretty
he
funny.
does fall down, yeah. And yeah, there's like a video of it, his stacks. But yeah, there's a lot of really like up and close shots of like the bat suit. It's got like the kind of people call them like the like hockey pads. Like I think like kind of the shoulder pad kind of stuff. Which I actually like. I actually don't mind the look. It looks pretty good. And in the shot, there isn't a cape, right? So we don't see any cape. We still see like the high collar. The ears, I kind of thought the ears looked kind of weird.
They
Just
remind me of
inserted.
like classic Batman, like as in like the first like maybe 20 years of Batman, where it's like the ears are very
Hmm.
kind of short, stubby in a way.
Well, but that's the thing. They're not. They're longer. The because Short and Stubby was what is it, Ben Affleck's Batman,
Yeah.
right? Like that's what his one would really like, because obviously it was like a homage to the Dark Knight Returns, right? And whereas we, with this Batman, it also kind of confirms that, the piece in the middle of his chest, like that's an ongoing kind of motif or an idea. That's how it looks. And so it isn't like a proper symbol, but there is some kind of compartment in the chest that maybe kind of comes out, or maybe he uses in some capacity. So yeah, it's really cool to kind of see a more close up look of the suit, but obviously, like, it's not how it's gonna look in the final shot, so to speak. They're probably gonna, I don't know, Photoshop some of it and make it look more like metallic or armorish. But then on top of that, um, we also got new shots of the Batmobile, um, and it looks like something straight out of Fast and Furious,
It's a
which isn't
souped up
necessarily.
muscle car.
It is, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think I really like the back of it. It's got like these really nice kind of like the photo is just absolutely gorgeous. It's like it's got like these like red neon lights, got like the engine, and you have like Batman in the background. Also, it confirms that Batman does have a cape, which I don't think I remember
Well,
reading
that's the thing. I
anywhere
think a lot
about.
of
But
people just like,
yeah,
yeah, where's the cape? At least there's the cape here. So everyone's like, oh, thank
yeah,
God.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we don't know whether this is actually Patterson, or if this is just more kind of test shots that they're doing. But yeah, he's like in a warehouse of some kind. I'm not a big fan of like the front of the car, because it just looks like a like you said, like a muscle car.
But I'm assuming
Um,
there's going to be some sort of gadget thing that pops out somewhere, right? Like it's basically a Batmobile where it's like
I
has multi
guess.
uses. It just the thing is maybe it's covered, or as we've kind of speculated that this is like kind of like a semi-origin Batman that like
Yeah,
he originally
exactly.
has like this is like he's probably like under like his like Dodge or like a Ford GT that is kind of modded
Hmm.
with the gadget type of thing, and that's probably the progression that he's probably going to go with. I
Yeah,
wouldn't be
like as
surprised that's the way they
yeah,
go.
this well, they've officially said that this is like Batman Year Two, right? So, in a sense that he's been kind of being Batman for a little bit, but it's not like he doesn't have Lucius Fox, who's like head of like R&D, kind of creating gadgets and creating these cool kind of unique vehicles like we've seen in the Dark Knight and Batman v Superman, right? Like, he's got like, in those movies, he's got like, like, to be fair, I actually really like the Batmobile in Batman v Superman. It looked really cool. But obviously that's a very, very different. That's a more, like they said, like an established Batman, like a Batman who has been Batman for like 10 years plus or whatever. Whereas this is like a very like relatively new Batman. It's just really like I wonder, like, how he would look in the vehicle, right? Like, at least, like, when he's in like his like kind of traditional Batmobile, it kind of suits him because it almost looks like it sticks out, right? Like it's like this, it's a tank, or it's a this kind of almost like a prototype futuristic car, whereas this just kind of looks like a Mustang. It would almost be like, you're kind of driving, to get groceries, because of the coronavirus, and you look to your left and the car next to you just has like Batman sitting in a Mustang.
Yeah, and it's
Like
probably
it
gonna
just doesn't.
paralyze people to be like, yeah, don't worry, anyone, stop stealing toilet paper. It's all good. But
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like it doesn't. I don't know. It kind. Look, maybe like the execution in the like again. Here I am saying, I'm not going to make any final judgments, and here I am making judgments, right? But like, it does look kind of weird, but I mean, that's just my take on it. Hopefully, like, it looks a lot better in the final um movie.
yeah, because
I'm
that's the
still
thing.
loving the bat
That's
suit.
the thing. I'm not too harsh on it just because I think a lot of people had a WTF moment when, like, for example, like the Tumblr came out, and everyone's like,
Hmm.
why does Batman have like this big
That's
tank
true.
thing, or
Yeah,
like
and
like
yeah.
I feel like a lot of people had complaints with a lot of stuff with Batman and how it looks. Like Batman is one of those characters. Like, for example, like no one really cares about like what character Captain America looks like or something like that. I feel like it very much is these DC characters. Maybe Marvel characters at some point will get to that notoriety where they're just like, oh man, like I don't like the Iron Man suit this time or whatever it may be. But like
I don't think.
Batman and Superman, and then even Spider Man sometimes,
Here's the
some
thing.
majority of the time gets the for some reason the absolute critical, like, okay, I don't like the look of this, but like someone like,
Well,
I don't know, like,
here's the
who
thing.
cares what Black Widow looks like, really? Like,
Well, here's the thing. Like, I think for a majority of superhero characters, unless there's like a big palette swap change, people don't really care about like what they're wearing. Like, yeah, like if you look at Black Widow's like kind of costumes throughout the MCU, the only real one that kind of really sticks out to me was the one from like the Age of Ultron movie, which was like one that kind of used like electricity in it, so it had like a like blue tinges, like blue light and stuff that's supposed to signify, oh hey, this is electricity is blue, right? And like she obviously used her like kind of Black Widow Venom stuff, but then it's never utilized ever again in any of the other Marvel movies. So and then the only other thing, like in the latest Black Widow movies, has her in like her white Black Widow suit, which is obviously it's supposed to be like an iconic suit for her, but obviously because it's so different from her main one, it makes sense. So with someone like Iron Man, like I think there's very rarely much difference between his suits. They usually have like the golden. They're all different, but they usually have the golden red palette. Like the only one that kind of comes to mind is like the one that I think it was like in Iron Man 2, where like there's like a suitcase and he puts his hand in it and he puts it up against his chest and it kind of like molds around him, and it's like red and silver suit, and that kind of looks cool,
hmm.
right? Because it's so different, and it's like a callback to like his previous Iron Man suits that did kind of have that kind of look. But I think with something like Batman, like every time it like how does his equipment look, how does his bat plane look, how does his suit look, every single time people love looking at what Batman looks.
Well, the
And
people
and
behind, but well, that's the thing. The people behind this clearly know this because they're just leaking
yeah,
everything one by one, So they
yeah.
clearly know that like we are gonna dissect the ever loving crap out of this.
Yeah, and look, and the thing is, like, in the end, it might not look weird. It's and that's what I'll wait till like the final releases. The one extra thing is, while in the previous kind of shots where I was mentioning how, oh look, I don't know how the ears look like in, that kind of stunt workers bat suit. The ears and stuff look a lot better in this shot, like the ears and just the overall look. So I'm a lot more like confident in like how Batman looks like in the final piece because of these new pictures that have come out. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Batman kind of turns out under Matt Reeves.
Mm,
So yeah,
yeah.
I'm pretty excited about it.
No, that's good. That's good. But yeah, moving forward to a review that I had, speaking about DC, is we're going to be talking about Superman, and the animated version of, I would say, probably one of the most iconic Superman comics. I think it's a lot of people's favorites. It might actually be my favorite Superman comic. It's Superman
Okay.
Red Sun. And the basic premise of it is, what if Superman, instead of landing in the USA, he landed in Russia, and that would entail like what would happen if he landed in Russia during those times. He'd be basically enforcing communism, and that's kind of the general premise of it's more or less like a very big what if story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know that you've read it before. Like, what
Mm-hmm.
do you like the comic book?
Oh yeah, it's an excellent Superman story. I think that's the thing. A lot of the kind of really good um comics and kind of DC films, or even just like media in general, tend to be having the heroes put in a particular situation that's quite different from their everyday um, approach to things. So Superman's usually about truth, justice, and the American way. Well, now we're getting rid of the American way, and he's in Soviet Russia, and he's working for an authoritarian regime. It's Stalin from memory.
Yeah.
He's yeah, and so it's kind of seeing, well, what is the impact of having basically Superman working for what would be seen as the enemy. The Red Sun is an excellent graphic novel. I honestly like. I don't know if I'd call it like my favorite, just because like I haven't read too many like Superman.
Yeah, same.
Uh,
Yeah, that's the thing. Same here. I haven't read many, but for what I do remember, like Red Sun always just seemed to be like
yeah,
the
I mean,
the one that like stood out a little bit more.
yeah, like there are other ones like To the Man of Tomorrow, like that one's like a really graphic novel too. But I think the thing is with Red Sun in particular, like it's quite iconic because it kind of flips the character very similarly, like in the New 52, and just kind of like in that kind of era, there was like an extension of the multiverse where there was a like like what happened if Superman landed in Nazi Germany time and was under the possession, quote unquote, of Hitler, right? And so that had like a really interesting storyline, and it worked in a very similar way, where yeah, like he's working for the regime, but hey, is he a bad guy? Maybe. Does he kind of become good towards the end? Who knows? Like that's kind of the thing that we kind of learn as we're kind of going on with the story stuff. And I think that's the thing. Like ultimately, in Red Sun, it just kind of shows that yeah, he had like an ideology. Oh, also, would Kingdom Come count as a Superman story? No, because that has like the
It
Justice
has
League in it,
everything,
right?
but I don't know. It's kind of more focused on him.
Anyway, it's not important. Like, unfortunately, I've gotten caught up with is this a Superman story? What's the best one? Like All Star Superman, I think is also a really really good film. I think they did do a animated version of that, not with the like current animated team, but like I'm pretty sure they did All Star Superman, like or an adaptation of All Star Superman, which was like um, which ends up with like Superman dying or something. But it's like, what does he do like before then or something like that? It's really really good.
Hmm.
Yeah. But going on to the animated adaptation of Red Sun, what did you think about it, and how does it contrast to the graphic novel?
I honestly think it's pretty damn good. It does not follow it one to one, and I feel like
Okay.
that's where a lot of people are just like, okay, then I think that's where the things kind of change, where they're just like, there are a few things where like there's a few scenes that are pretty much pulled out exactly from the comic book, and just
Hmm.
done in and even with the same lines, and they do it that way. But there's a lot of things that they they change. But on top of that, that obviously, since this movie is about like an hour and a half, the content that's there, because I think Superman Red Sun and the comic book as well, it's really rich in, I guess the main kind of driving force is Superman believes in kind of like, kind of like he's kind of like the thing that brings the communist world to a thing where it's like everyone is equal. And how do you
Hmm.
enforce everyone to be equal? You have to kind of be like a semi-dictator, and control people's free will to do so. And I
Hmm.
feel like in the comic book, Superman deals a lot more with the struggles of being like, hey, like, what do I do here? Am I doing for this for the greater good of the people because everyone has to be equal, or is it just my ego that's going ahead? And there's all these like competing, stuff of just like, yeah, the Americans will collapse because they not everyone's equal, and so it has all these kind of themes. And I think
Yeah.
the movie does not really do much of that. They probably do it maybe a few times, but it's not so much as the extent of, I guess, Superman being like, okay, seriously, like, what do I actually do? So you
Hmm.
don't really get that humanized element to it. But a lot of the stuff generally stays the same, where like he
Lex Luthor
gets
is still the bad guy. Oh,
sorry.
sorry, the antagonist. Lex Luthor is still
Yes,
the
Lex
antagonist.
Luthor is still the antagonist. He
Yeah.
isn't as prominent as he is in the comic book. I think in the comic book,
Oh, really?
I think in the
That's a
comic book
shame.
they show him as like more of a person being like, because in this universe he's married to Lois Lane, um, uh, which is a really
Hmm.
cool thing. And in the comic book, he kind of like, Lois Lane is really dedicated to Lex Luthor, and he's
Hmm.
basically just like, yeah, just leave me alone and let me deal with Superman. And this goes on for years, but she's
Yeah.
very loyal to him. And I think in this movie, it's more like, oh hey, like, leave me alone. But like, it isn't really touched on more further than that. But
Well,
Lex
I
is still,
well I
but
don't
like
really
that's the
care
like,
about the I guess the Lois Lane relationship,
yeah.
but I mean more like because it's like the competing ideas,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Because you
yeah.
have
Well, that's the thing. Yeah,
Superman
yeah, absolutely.
representing communism, and then you have Luthor representing capitalism, and showing like there's always like the struggle between like, oh, at this stage communism is good, but at this stage capitalism is good. Like there's like this kind of back and forth where they're all trying to compete, and then like I'm pretty sure the Green Lanterns come in at some
Yeah,
point
they
as
find the
well.
Green Lantern ring. Well,
Yeah.
Lex finds the Green Lantern ring and kind of weaponizes it to build an army. But that
Mhm.
that in the comic book it has Hal Jordan in it. But in
Mm.
this in the movie they just have it like as some sort of like police force type of thing. So there's like a few like little small things that
Yeah.
kind of get cut out. Like for example, they have their own version of like what do you call it? Like their clone of Superman called Superior Man. Um,
Hmm.
and there's a few things
That's
like
actually
that.
pretty smart. That's I kind of really like that. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty funny.
Sorry.
So they have that. And of course they do have the Brainiac storyline, which is like pretty much one of the main storylines in this. I think the main problem with the Brainiac storyline is that they do a shortcut way of doing things. I won't really spoil it, but essentially they do it in a lazy way to kind of
Hmm.
show that like Brainiac is evil. Um,
Hmm.
but essentially they don't do it as smart as the comic book does.
Yeah,
Um,
they don't do it justice.
yeah,
Yeah.
they don't do it justice in a very like especially the end. I think that's why a lot of people got pissed off is just purely the end because I think like the end of the comic book kind of leaves it at this note of like so it all kind of comes back together in a way or like kind of rounds about a bit upon itself. But
Hmm.
yeah,
So
the
so
movie
is the
doesn't really
ending
touch upon that.
so is the ending different to the ending in the graphic novel?
I think the general premise is the same. However, you don't see. I guess the easiest way to explain it is the movie ends on one particular note, whilst the comic book ends like continues on from that ending note, and then adds a little bit extra. That would make the story a lot more interesting, I guess. Being like, so it's like a little bookend. Like, okay, that was really cool.
Oh,
So they don't have that in the movie. But they do have it in the comic, obviously, and obviously, I think the best thing about this animated thing is Batman, Russian Batman. I think Russian
sure.
Batman's awesome. He has a Russian accent. He has the hat. And he has, he obviously has the plan to bring back down Superman. But not only just Superman, but as well his regime. He's like he's like anarchy,
Hmm.
for Russia, and it's really he has his own little minions called like the Batman, I think. And it's like, yeah, I
Hmm.
think that whole premise is really cool and really interesting. That like it's set in that particular way. In this one, Batman's actually shown to be he grew up in a gulag, so they do actually go to a gulag and things like that, and I feel like that's very interesting way to do things. Um, the one thing that another thing as well that a lot of people don't like, and I can see the reviews, is that yeah, and you can kind of see what they did. The modern politics they kind of put this in the film. So Wonder Woman has a big major part in Red Sun,
Hmm.
kind of a thing, as in like in the comic book, she kind of has this kind of she works with Russia and Superman to kind of like make sure there's no.
I don't remember her in the comic.
Oh, she was in the comic because
Okay.
I literally just briefly like
Mm,
went through
looked
it
it up. Okay.
after
Yeah. All
watching it,
right.
but essentially yeah she was basically helping Superman, kind of being like like we want to help out humanity,
Yeah. Yeah.
for no pain. To do that is to squash everyone's freedom, but at some
Mm.
point obviously she kind of changes her mind and really hates Superman in the end.
Mm.
So that's kind of what happens. But when the I guess movie, what they do is instead of kind of having that really big major betrayal against Superman, and kind of standing maybe against Batman in a way, her whole thing is like, hey, Batman and you, Superman, are also stupid. Like basically, man is evil, and it's not done in a really smart way where it's like, okay, like men are evil, whatever it is, but it's not just one instance. She consistently throughout the whole film, like maybe 5 times, just says, men are the reason why everything's going to shit. Men are doing this and doing that. And I'm like, okay, then, like,
I
it complete.
mean,
But that's it. It completely
maybe I'll have to
destroys. I
watch
guess
it. Maybe I'll.
I think to me, I think it completely destroys the. I guess I like the kind of in a sense of like Wonder Woman had a like she was like, I'm gonna be pro communist, and then she was like, you know what, I don't really like this anymore, type of thing. I feel like
Mm.
it destroys her story arc having that, instead of just being like, you know what, you're both evil.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say I don't think it's completely out of Wonder Woman's character to kind of consider the actions of man and men to be like like primitive or like not good for lack of a better word. Because she, in general, like she like if you look at like the Wonder Woman movie, if you look at like her comics and stuff, it always seems to be a contrast of, well, war is bad, and mankind tends to purposely put themselves in a position of war. And so if she's maybe it might have been better, instead of her just pointing out her like what like what is it, men are bad, I don't know what she says in it, but like instead of just being like, well, like maybe they just do it one time, which is like towards that end period where she's like frustrated because Superman hasn't been listening to any of her suggestions, and it's only kind of escalating the tensions.
Mm.
Maybe like if there was a more nuanced way, maybe that might have been better. But I'll have to give it a watch and see whether or not
Yeah,
I
I
like
still
it or
think
not.
it's
I might
yeah,
have to reread.
yeah,
I might have to reread Red Sun. 'Cause it's
yeah.
been a while.
I think it's worth a read and a watch. It obviously changes in difference. I think like obviously the more
Well, a lot of
psychological,
the
more like nuanced version is the comic. I would say. This one is more
well,
just
yeah.
like
I
yeah, we're
mean, it's
just
always.
gonna play it for that.
I mean, to be honest, it's always been the case that the comics tend to have more. Technically, it has more time to flesh out the character, right?
Yeah, there's as I
And
mentioned before, there's a lot of I guess like extra side characters that aren't in the movie.
which is
For
fine. I
yeah,
mean, it
which
makes
is fine.
sense.
They essentially they kind of condensed it in a way of like, do we need this character? No, okay, we'll
Yes,
make
no,
this
yeah,
happen instead.
yeah. I mean, they did a very similar thing with Batman Hush, whereas they initially made like a lot of the movie like for one with the comic, but then they did like a bait and switch and switched out who Hush was at the end and switched it with someone else, and therefore made the ending very different to the comic. So it's like almost like 80% of the movie is one for one with the comic almost, and then the last kind of 20% is very different. Doesn't make it a bad movie, and I think that's the thing. Like doing things one for one sometimes isn't a good thing because it's like, well, why don't I just read the comic? I mean, look at Aladdin, look at Lion King,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those movies are basically one for one. They are trying out new things with like Mulan, for example, right? But like, whether that will be any good, I don't know. We'll have to see going forward. But yeah, I'll have to give Batman Red Sun a watch as soon as I can. Just like usually I love these movies, DC, because this isn't set in like that shitty kind of DC and animated style, right? It's like a different studio made it, correct?
I don't know what shitty Dis. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
Okay, so like all the movies, Batman, Hush, and
Yeah,
like
yeah, all
the
those like
Justice,
kind of
like
direct
the new,
to
yeah,
DVD
yeah,
type of
like
things. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Is it in the same style as of those movies or not?
Like, well, that's the animation
They,
probably the exact same, but like obviously art style is different. The art
yeah,
style
yeah, the
mimics
art
the
style is different. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, the art style and animation
yeah.
like kind of are two in one, because the kind of these direct to DVD DC movies tend to be animated very poorly, and the art style looks bad as well. Whereas, although that being said, I think ever since I think like maybe like 2 movies ago, like those kind of movies have gotten a lot better. I think oh yeah, when they did the Death of Superman movies, it's like because they basically kind of almost did like a semi rebirth because he changed his costume, he got a new suit, and they are releasing like a new movie. I think it's called like Apocalypse War or something, which is based around the Dark Side War comic series from the New 52. So they're slowly making their way through everything, and I wouldn't be too surprised if they end up doing like a bunch of like rebirth storylines and stuff like that. It seems to be like right up their alley.
Well, that's the thing.
Especially
All the animated movies are pretty much like cliff notes on like, hey, if you don't want to read like probably
yeah,
the
watch
best
this movie.
versions
Yeah,
of like the comic books that we have, graphic novels, then
yeah,
we've got animated versions of them, which is
yeah.
kind of cool that they have that.
Well, if only they went. If only if they went as bootleg. That's the only
Yeah,
difference.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
DC generally has really good what is it, animation. But then those movies are just like ugh, awful to look at.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
But yeah, definitely. I think Red Sun is worth a read and a watch. Definitely for sure.
Mhm.
And just to move on to one final thing I did watch as well, is a Netflix TV show. It is called I Am Not Okay With This. And I'm not okay with this TV show because I did not like it.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I think,
Well,
yeah,
okay, so when you mentioned this movie, I had no idea what it was. So tell me a little bit about this film.
yeah. Well, technically, it's a TV
Oh,
show.
sorry, TV
And
show.
it
Sorry.
has the season 2 coming. But the episodes are about 25 to like 20 minutes each. So essentially,
Okay.
you can do this in like literally a sitting. It's only like 2 hours and 30 minutes. Um, basically this season. Um, and what this is based off actually a comic book. Who wrote the comic book that it's based off is the guy who also wrote the End of the Fucking World TV show. And
Oh, okay. I've heard about
if
that
you
show.
remember, I absolutely hate that show, and I don't know why
Well, then
people
why,
like it.
why did you watch this one?
Because I thought it was gonna be different, but I found out it's also the same writer and director. So like, I'm like, okay,
Well,
I do not like your sensibility at all, but okay then.
yeah. Well, I remember in like end of the fucking world or whatever. It was about like some guy who's like a psychopath and this
The
his
girl's also a
girlfriend or
psychopath,
something.
and they're just like, we'll
But
fall in love together and be psychopaths together.
yeah, but then
Some
they try to
very
kill each other, right?
some
Or they
very
try to.
hipster shit.
Yeah, it does sound very, yeah, it sounds very hipster. But hey, look, that just means it's not our demographic, right? I
Yeah.
haven't watched it, so I can't actually say whether it's good or not. So I have to take that position. But yeah. So you thought it might be okay, give it a shot. Maybe this new show might be different. But yeah, like what's the plot of it
Well, the
about?
plot is it's very generic, and you know
Okay,
exactly where things are going to go. So the general premise is,
okay.
it follows a girl named Sydney. She's the you might know her from It. You know, she's the redhead from It.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
she's the main character. And she
Okay.
lives in a small town. She's in high school. You know, she's pretty much a nerd.
As you are, yeah.
Yeah, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, basically her dad committed suicide, so she's dealing with that, and she's
Oh
also dealing
boy.
with her
Yeah.
own sexuality. So very
Mm-hmm.
base premise, you know, like teenage things. So you kind of know exactly where it's kind of going.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the difference is that she, with her, I guess, hormones changing and her being different, on top of this, she has powers. She has superpowers, and she basically has to try to control her powers,
Oh,
and try to hide. And
superpowers?
yeah,
You say?
superpowers. They're more or less telekinesis type powers, which can push things
Okay.
away and, you know, do all that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically her being like, I need to, you know, think about like who I am as a person as well as try to control my powers. So very, I guess, generic plot. And yeah, and I feel like that the best thing probably about it is probably performances like Sophie Lillis. That's her name. Um,
Mm-hmm.
she does a really great performance. I think she has a really good career in Hollywood, following, you know, everything that she's currently been in. Um, I think that, yeah, the best thing is really about is the actors really doing their own things, especially the teenagers. For example, her friend slash hookup person, that she does hook up with called Stanley. He does a good job. Her
Like
best friend,
her romantic interest? Is that
her
what
romantic
you...
that's it. Her romantic interest. It's played off really weird where like they're friends but they're also romantic. And also her friend Dina, who's also basically her best friend, and obviously she falls in love with the jock guy, which is completely different from like the two nerdy girls, and obviously it's like, oh no, we're falling apart, yada yada yada. So like you can kind of
Mhm.
see it is a very base premise plot of like them dealing with like teenage stuff, and then obviously her dealing with, you know, the suicide of her dad and what's to do with that, as well as her
Well,
powers. So it all kind of
yeah.
comes down together.
Is there like a conspiracy around her father's death?
I think they kind of touch on it in the sense of like there is no real reason why he committed suicide. And
Right.
of it,
So it's very suspicious.
well, it is very suspicious that it was really nice, but it's like up until probably the second last episode, they give you kind of like a semi info dump of like, okay, your dad, it was not what he seems. Here's some
Hmm.
information, and that's what it kind of leads into, kind of like the final episode. Um, and that's the thing. I wouldn't say it's a spoiler, but even like the first frame of this show is literally the main character, Sydney, covered in blood. So
Sure.
obviously, you know, like it's one of those things where it's like, okay, something bad's gonna happen where someone's gonna get killed.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, I bet you're wondering how he ended up covered in blood.
Yeah,
Here's us 30 minutes ago. Yeah, like
so
that kind of
you
type of
basically
thing.
have that, and obviously she talks to like us, the audience, with like a Dear
Hmm.
Diary type of thing. Um, but that's the thing. I feel like the show is it's like I wouldn't say it's completely bad, but I think it's just like it's one of those things where it just doesn't do anything interesting. With its plot and premise, like you've seen this all before. Like you've probably seen this in Chronicle. You've seen this in probably a lot of different like superhero type stuff. Like it's all kind of the same stuff. So
Mhm.
that's why I don't feel like it's you don't have to watch it, but it's a 2 hour and 30 minute. It's a very low investment thing. There is a season 2 coming out at some point. They obviously it does end on a semi cliffhanger. Um, so like I wouldn't suggest it really to anyone unless there's really not much else to watch, because to me personally, this is just run of the mill, same stuff that you've seen before. Like there really is no real surprises, I guess, in this TV show. That's what I'm trying to say. So there's nothing really too interesting about it. But hey, if you like that style of the end of the fucking world guy, then yeah, go for it. It's definitely not my cup of tea. But hey, it is what it is.
Okay, so yeah, it's just maybe like something that doesn't do anything new with the genre, rather than I guess being something new on Netflix, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It
Well,
very
yeah, it seems to
it very
be.
much mimics like Carrie as well. So it's kind of like okay, like I know exactly where this is going. Like no
You know, I wonder,
surprises.
I wonder if like it seems to be something that is almost made like algorithmically. I say this all the time, right? Like
But it's
I
true
think
though.
I say,
It makes all the perfect sense. Like End of the Fucking World came out on Netflix. Well, it wasn't really a Netflix original. It's a UK show. But
mm,
obviously internationally, it's a Netflix thing. Everyone's like, okay, everyone really seems to like this show. Let's get the same, writer director, to literally make his own thing that is also based on the same guy's comic, as End of the Fucking World. So that's why it's all very similar and very samey.
yeah,
And
but then I was also going to say like also the fact that they're kind of looking at, oh well, who is what kind of show, like what kind of TV shows are good. Oh, comic book superheroes are something that people like.
or
Um,
teenagers with special powers, aka
yeah,
11.
teenage,
Like
yeah,
11. Like
11,
pretty much she has the
yeah,
same
exactly.
powers as 11.
11, right, got it, exactly, right, yeah. Stranger People like Stranger Things. All right, we'll just put Stranger Things. And also telekinetics. Look, to be honest, I don't know how it looks like in the show, because maybe it might be different, but telekinetics in general is a very low budget superpower to kind of mimic on even on a small screen, because unless you're kind of using, you're just moving an object up and you're motioning your hand up, right? Unless it has like, in the comics they typically show like, oh, like when someone's using telekinetics, it'll show their like, their brain is like showing a purple hue, and then the object is a purple hue, and it's moving up, like, it's supposed to show like, because it's a static
Yeah,
image. It's
yeah,
supposed to
you
try
have to
and
show
convey movement.
motion in a picture.
Whereas in something like a TV show, like telekinetics is like a wet dream, because it's very easy to do. It doesn't use a lot of CGI. It could even be done using practical effects as well, if they have the capacity to do it. And so it's not a big surprise that, yeah, like we don't get to see like these more different power sets, and maybe that's why they decide to go with this comic book, because, oh well, her powers are very simple to do, and it's from the same author. All right, who's someone who can pick, oh, this actress, because it's a younger actress, right, from the first It movie.
Yeah, yeah, for the first hit movie,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, so yeah, like oh, we'll get her because maybe she hasn't been in a lot of stuff, so she might be like pretty negotiable with how much we need to pay her and stuff, and she's got like a good background. Like it kind of almost seems like it's like, oh well, this is a perfect fit because it ticks a bunch of boxes that we think we can sell on our platform. But yeah, I mean, apparently, like 55 different like movies and TV shows are coming out in Netflix, so at least they're pumping out content there. In that regard, like hopefully I'll watch all of Altered Carbon by next week and give a review on that. But yeah, I look, even if it's not good, I think like, yeah, Netflix tends to at least try to do like, hey, we'll see what sticks. We'll throw it out there, give it a season, say that it will get a second season to give it more hype. Because that seems to be the thing. Like a lot of these shows, before like before they actually even start premiering, or maybe just as they start premiering, the season two's already confirmed, right? You
Yeah,
told me this.
most of the time they do that, where it's like, yeah, when the hype
Yeah,
semi dies down or
and
building up, they just like season
well,
2 confirmed, so let's go.
yeah, this and I think it's just a marketing ploy, right? It's not necessarily that these shows are good per se, but it's more like, well, we need to give this show momentum, and what's a good way to give momentum to tell the masses that, oh, well, it's getting a season two. Well, if it's getting a season two, it must be good. It must be worth investing in, when realistically it's just a tactic that they're doing to try and get people invested in the first season to justify the season. But again, I don't have any proof. I don't work at Netflix, so we'll have to see going forward. Whether maybe you might like season two. Who knows?
No, just a solid no. If you're gonna watch anything on Netflix, just watch Lock and Key instead. That's a way better show. But yeah, definitely. That's gonna be us for this week. You can always listen to us on Spotify, iTunes, Libsyn, and our YouTube channel. We stream live on our channel, Marketing Movies. So until next time, see you guys.
Catch ya.